Imagine yourself sitting on a cold stone bench. The chill seeps slowly into your thighs, a sensation that sends a quiet shiver up your spine. You're not alone around you. Softly echoed murmurs blend with the steady trickle of water, creating a strangely calming background. The smell is distinctive, yet subtle, a mixture of stone vinegar and something earthier, something undeniably human. Beside you lies a sponge soaked in vinegar, the Tersorium Rome's humble attempt at hygiene. You pick it up gingerly, feeling the dampness soak through your fingertips. You hesitate for a moment, aware of how many others have shared this very sponge. Then you exhale slowly and complete your task, trying to block out thoughts of shared germs. Everything here feels oddly serene despite the lack of privacy. You shift slightly, adjusting to the unfamiliar openness. Outside this latrine, life in ancient Rome moves rhythmically and endlessly. The soft clinking of metal from nearby artisans blends harmoniously with distant shouts of street vendors selling fresh olives, warm bread, and sweet wine. Occasionally, laughter erupts from a nearby tavern, followed by the rhythmic clip-clop of horses pulling carts loaded with goods bound for the bustling markets. You close your eyes for a moment, absorbing this tapestry of sound. Despite the activity, there's a comforting predictability to it all. You slowly finish standing up and adjusting your tunic, leaving behind the faintly scented vinegar sponge. You step out into the street, the warmth of the Roman sun enveloping you gently. Before fully rejoining the bustling crowd, you pause to breathe deeply. Dim your lights, lower your screen, breathe out. If you're still here, subscribe, and tell me what time is it where you are. Before Rome carved its majestic aqueducts into stone, humans had already been dealing with the most basic of needs, relieving themselves. And the way they did it might just make you squirm a little. You're in ancient Mesopotamia. There's no drainage, no pipes, just a shallow hole behind your sun-baked mud hut. You crouch low, feeling the soft earth beneath your feet. Beside you, a ceramic jar. Not for water, for waste. Once it's full, someone carries it out to the fields. Now picture Egypt, the rich used stone stools with a sand bucket underneath. You're a priest sitting in the shade of a temple wall, carefully lowering yourself onto cold, polished stone. Outside, a servant waits, holding a jug of water to rinse your hands. Then, Crete, the Minoan civilization. They had one of the world's first flushing toilets. You enter a small stone room, the floor sloped ever so slightly. Once you're done, you lift a jug and pour water into the channel. It washes everything away. There's something oddly comforting about that. And in Greece, it's more discreet. A clay chamber pot under the bed, or a small courtyard corner curtained by linen. It's private, it's personal. But still, nothing quite like what Rome would later create. From holes in the dirt to sand-filled boxes to hand-poured water over smooth stone. Our ancestors tried it all. Crude, simple, sometimes ingenious, always human. But all of that was about to change, drastically. And then Rome. Not the empire yet, just a settlement, built on hills beside a river with muddy streets and livestock walking freely. But even in its infancy, Rome had one thing others lacked: an obsession with order. And waste it needed managing. Imagine this. You're a Roman artisan, early 6th century BCE. You step outside your home near the Forum. There's a smell in the air, sour, warm, human. It clings to the stone and flows downhill. Because underground, there's something new. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest sewage systems in the world. A massive stone drain carved beneath the streets, quietly swallowing the city's runoff rain, blood food scraps. And worse, it didn't start that way. At first, it was an open-air ditch, a channel for the Tiber's overflow. But Romans, ever practical, began feeding waste into it. Public latrines would come much later, but the bones were here. Now, aqueducts. You live 2 centuries later. You look up and see arches cut across the skyline, stone veins carrying water from hills far away, fresh, cool, flowing constantly. Not just for baths or fountains, but for flushing filth from the heart of the city. Rome was growing, and so was its waste. So they buried it, designed around it, built with it in mind. The streets weren't clean, not by our standards, but they flowed. And beneath your sandals, beneath the carts and feet and animals, ran the quiet hum of water always moving. Rome, without knowing it, was laying the groundwork for something radical: the public toilet, shared, open, and engineered. But not all latrines were created equal. Not all latrines were created equal. And in Rome, what you sat on said a lot about who you were. Some were grand, some were makeshift, but each had its place in the empire's sprawling story. Imagine you're in a bustling Roman city, not the capital, but a provincial hub. You wander into the forum past market stalls and mosaic fountains. There, nestled beside the bathhouse, is a public latrine. Open archways, cool stone, inside rows of polished seats perfectly aligned. This is a public toilet, free to use or nearly so. Men, women, travelers, soldiers, they all sit here side by side. No walls, just the sound of water running beneath. Then, a different scene. You're posted at a military camp along the frontier. Everything's efficient, practical, even the toilets. Wooden benches over trenches, a bucket of vinegar, and a sponge nearby. The latrine is placed just far enough from camp to keep things sanitary, but close enough in case of sudden need. And always watched. Now, outside the city? You live in the countryside. Your home is modest. You don't have running water. But you do have a simple pit toilet dug behind the house, lined with stones, and covered when not in use. Not grand, not sophisticated, but yours. And in Rome's elite villas, that's where things get decadent. Imagine yourself stepping into a marbled room inside a wealthy patrician's home. The toilet seat inlaid with ivory, the walls painted with delicate frescoes of nature. Perfume lingers in the air. There's a servant waiting with warm water, a cloth for drying, maybe even scented oil. Because for Rome's wealthy, even defecation was curated. Each toilet reflected the user's world, their class, their duties, their resources, and sometimes their loneliness. You might find yourself in a villa with a private latrine, but no conversation, no graffiti, just silence. Where you sat revealed who you were, and sometimes who you weren't. In Rome, even bathroom breaks were political. You weren't just relieving yourself. You were making a statement. Or rather, Rome was making one about you. Picture yourself in a public latrine. You find a seat at the end of the row. It's chipped, cold, slightly uneven, but it's there. You sit quietly, eyes down, trying not to meet anyone's gaze. Now glance to your right. That man, he's wearing fine sandals, gold threading on the hem of his tunic. He's seated near the center, where the flow of water is strongest, the air fresher, the seats smoother. In a Roman latrine, location mattered. The central seats were cleaner, easier to access, less exposed to the smell from the waste channel at the far end. They were unofficially reserved for those of status. You might not see guards or signs, but there were rules, unspoken, unwritten, and deeply understood. It wasn't just about seat placement. Some brought their own tersorium, their personal sponge on a stick, wrapped in cloth, scented with vinegar or oil. A subtle flex. Others had servants wait nearby holding towels or water jugs. Now picture a marketplace latrine, crowded, humid, echoing with chatter. A merchant walks in. Everyone shifts ever so slightly, making space. Then a beggar enters. No one moves. He finds a seat at the far end, near the waste flow. He says nothing. Neither do you, but the hierarchy has spoken. Even here, with trousers down, knees bent, Rome never let you forget your place. It was a mirror, a quiet one, built into the stone. Some scholars believe these silent rules taught Romans discipline. Others say it embedded inequality deeper than words ever could. You couldn't escape the social ladder. Not in the streets, not in the courts, not even in the latrine. Privilege in Rome even included bathroom breaks. Nothing in Rome was truly free, not even poop. Picture this: you're approaching a busy public latrine. It's midday, warm. The stone underfoot is hot. There's a faint queue forming by the archway, and beside the door a man with a small wooden box. He's not a guard, he's a collector, because using this latrine, it costs a small fee. A few quadrans bronze coins clinking in your palm. It's not much, but for the poor it adds up. Every day, every time. This idea wasn't random. It came from Emperor Vespasian. He needed revenue, and he saw opportunity not in palaces or temples, but in urine. Urine in Rome was valuable. It was collected from urinals and sold to fuller's laundry workers who used its ammonia-rich liquid to bleach fabric and tan leather. So Vespasian taxed it. Yes, a tax on pee. It was controversial. Embarrassing, some said. But when challenged, Vespasian is said to have held a coin to his nose and asked, "Does it smell profit?" Didn't stink. From that point on, the phrase pecunia non olet money, doesn't smell, became part of Roman legacy. But there were other rules too. In some cities, graffiti warned against loitering, stealing sponges fined, blocking the water flow punishable. Some latrines had posted schedules, others written edicts from magistrates. Don't fight, don't deface, don't defecate in the wrong place. You might think who would break these rules, but Rome had its toilet troublemakers. People who didn't pay. People who lingered too long gossiping. People who, well, got creative. Punishments varied, from public shame to fines to being banned from the facility. And if you were poor, you risked more than embarrassment. You risked exclusion from one of the few places where hygiene met dignity. A toilet was more than a hole. It was infrastructure, a social tool, a revenue stream. Rome knew this and taxed accordingly. Maintaining cleanliness had its price. Someone had to keep it clean, and that someone wasn't you. Step inside a Roman latrine at dawn, before the crowds, before the murmur of conversation and the shuffling of sandals. There's someone already there, a man with a brush made of stiff reeds, a bucket, a rag tied around his face. He's the foricarius, a public toilet worker, not a glamorous job, but an essential one. His work begins early, scooping debris, scrubbing stone, checking the water channel, making sure it flows. Sometimes he pours vinegar to kill the smell. Sometimes he just lights a small brazier to burn herbs and mask the odor. His tools? Simple. Rags, lime, salt, and his own tolerance for filth. Some were city employees hired by local officials. Others were enslaved, tasked with the dirtiest jobs, in silence. Their labor went unnoticed. Until it didn't. Because if they failed, if the latrine clogged, if the water stopped, if the smell drifted into the forum, everyone noticed. Sometimes the aquarii would arrive too. Water engineers, inspecting the pipes, listening for the hum of flow beneath the floor. They tapped the walls. They watched the drainage. Rome had built a system. But like all systems, it only worked if someone kept it breathing. And sometimes, things went wrong. A collapsed tunnel, a burst pipe, a sponge stuck where it shouldn't be. Repairs could take days. And during that time, the latrine would sit quiet, foul, forgotten. You'd walk by and wince. You might complain, but you'd never ask who cleaned it. You'd never thank them. Because in Rome, like today, sanitation was invisible. Until it wasn't. But latrines weren't always safe. It smelled of vinegar and stone. But sometimes it also smelled like danger. Latrines weren't just places for relief. They were enclosed, dark, echoing chambers where whispers traveled faster than footsteps. And in that half-shadowed silence, not everyone entered with clean intentions. Start with theft. You arrive with a pouch tied to your belt, a few coins, maybe a trinket. You set it beside you just for a moment. When you reach for it again, it's gone. Petty theft was common. So common, in fact, that some graffiti on latrine walls warned, watch your purse, not just your rear. Then, there was espionage. Roman politics thrived on secrets, and where better to eavesdrop than where no one made eye contact, senators whispered deals over sewage. Couriers passed messages under the guise of bowel urgency. Spies crouched 2 seats away, ears open. But the most infamous case, assassination. In the year 217 CE, Emperor Caracalla stopped to relieve himself on the side of a road at a small latrine station. As he sat alone, unguarded, a soldier approached. Pretending to deliver a message, he drew his blade. And before Caracalla could rise, it was over. The emperor died on the toilet, not in a palace, not on a battlefield, but hunched and human pants down, vulnerable. It shocked Rome, and it terrified the powerful. Because if an emperor could fall there, so could anyone. Some latrines even became sites of assault, hidden corners, lack of supervision, moments where silence became opportunity. And yet, people kept coming, because there was no choice. The risks were real, but so was the need, to sit, to breathe, to let go. Latrines in the end were human spaces. And where humans gather, so do flaws. Danger took a different shape for women. If you were a woman in ancient Rome, using the toilet wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. Start with the basics. Most public latrines unisex. No doors, no partitions. Just a long stone bench with carved holes and strangers on either side. Now imagine entering that space. You lift your tunic, sit, eyes forward, back straight. But the man beside you doesn't look away. There are no guards, no attendants, and no laws saying you deserve privacy, so women learned to avoid. They waited for hours, or traveled farther, or relied on private arrangements if they could afford them. The rich, they built personal latrines at home. Servants stood watch. Daughters never entered alone. But the poor had no such luxury. Some markets offered designated hours for women, early mornings, late evenings, windows of relative safety. Still whispers carried stories of groping hands of stolen garments of girls who entered and never came out the same. So they warned each other. They scratched graffiti on the walls, crude but clear. Drawings, names, symbols of warning, messages like, "Don't trust the silence," "Stay near the light," "Bring a friend." Some even etched curses, tiny prayers to Venus or Diana to ward off would-be predators. Archaeologists have found these marks, not just in Rome but in Pompeii, Ostia, even in far-off provinces. They are the voices of women who had no voice, not in the Senate, not in the courts, but here on the latrine dei walls. And if you look closely, you can still read them, still hear them, still feel what it meant to need relief and fear it. Latrines weren't just practical, they were spiritual. You lower yourself onto the stone. It's colder than you expected, not just cool but piercing. The kind of cold that makes you tense without meaning to, that climbs your spine like a whisper and settles at the base of your neck. This isn't your private chamber. There's no wooden lid, no cushion, no porcelain polish, just carved limestone rounded by years of use worn smooth by countless bodies before yours. You shift a little, trying to find a comfortable angle. But comfort wasn't the point here. This was utility. This was function. This was Rome. The seat is slightly curved, almost elegant in its design. There's a small dip, a gentle slope toward the central opening. An opening that looks far deeper than it probably is. But you don't want to look too long. Beneath you, you hear water. A slow, steady stream, gurgling below the bench. It's not loud, but it echoes softly, bouncing against the stone and blending with other sounds, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional slap of sandals on marble, a sneeze from somewhere near the entrance. There's no privacy here, just a row of holes side by side. You glance to your left. A man clears his throat. To your right, a child giggles before being hushed. You look down instead. At your hands, at the ground, anywhere but at the people beside you. The smell is complex. Not entirely foul, but not pleasant either. It's vinegar, earth, stone, old water, and something you can't quite name, a faint trace of something sweet and sour and human. This latrine is well maintained. You can tell. There's a faint scent of crushed herbs, maybe mint. Someone was here earlier with a bucket and a brush. Still, it's clear that this place serves hundreds, maybe thousands. And as you sit, you can't help but wonder how many people have sat exactly where you are now. How many conversations were whispered here? How many secrets heard only by the walls? According to archaeologists, latrines like this, shared stone-seated and open, were common across the Roman Empire. From Ostia to Pompeii to the heart of Rome itself, public toilets were part of daily life. Not hidden away, not shameful, just another communal space. The boulder beneath you is ancient, functional, impersonal, and somehow oddly comforting. You breathe in again, let the sounds wash over you, and remind yourself you're just one body on one stone in the long, unbroken line of history. You finish, or you think you do. There's no paper here. No soft white sheet to fold or crumple. Instead, you reach slowly toward the communal trough in front of you. It's shallow, lined with stone, filled with water that's been darkened by time and something else. You try not to think about it. Beside the trough, resting neatly, is the tersorium, a wooden stick with a rounded sponge tied to one end. It looks worn, stained even, but it's the only one within reach. You pick it up, it's wet, heavy, saturated with vinegar water. At least that's what they use to soak it in. Sometimes salt water, sometimes just water. The Romans believed vinegar helped disinfect. But standing here now, with this thing in your hand, you're not so sure. You shift slightly on the stone seat, then slide the sponge end under your tunic. It touches your skin, cold, damp, soft but not gentle, more abrasive than you expect. You wince, not because it hurts, but because the sensation is so unlike anything you've known. You wipe, slowly, carefully. The sponge squishes slightly. You feel the fibers push against your body, then pull away. A ritual of cleansing, communal but intimate, public but strangely private in its execution. According to Seneca, the philosopher, a man once ended his life using a tersorium, a quiet tragic protest in a public place. That's how common these tools were, how woven into the routines of daily Roman life. You rinse the sponge in the trough, pushing it gently into the water, watching the ripple spread. A light swirl of something oily appears, and you don't ask what it is. Then, without drying it, you place it back where you found it, on the stone ledge next to others, just like it. There's no shame, no embarrassment, only routine. This was how it worked. Each person used the tersorium, cleaned it in the same basin, and left it for the next. No replacements, no disposables, just reuse. You may wonder, how did people accept this? But the Romans didn't think like we do. They saw the latrine as a shared necessity, not a private luxury. To them, a communal sponge was cleaner than a dirty hand. It was a solution. And more than that, it was Roman. As you stand, you glance back at the sponge, still glistening, still waiting, and you wonder, not for the last time, how many others touched it before you and whether they ever thought to ask what touched them back. You shift your weight and hear it again, the faint, steady gurgle beneath you. It's not random, not runoff or some idle puddle. It's part of the system, a silent, tireless stream designed to carry everything away. You lean forward, just slightly, peering between the carved openings. There, at the base of the stone bench, runs a shallow channel just wide enough for waste to pass, just deep enough to keep it moving. This is Rome's ingenuity, a system built not just for use, but for flow. The channel beneath you connects to a larger drain which leads eventually into the great Cloaca Maxima, one of the oldest sewers in the world, still flowing today. Water is fed from nearby aqueducts, redirected and measured not to drink, but to cleanse, to sweep the streets, the gutters, and the latrines. You hear it now with new ears, not just a trickle, but a machine, an ancient stone-born machine. Sometimes the water moves fast, a healthy flow. Other times, it slows to a whisper, barely pushing the waste forward. You wonder, does it all make it out? Or does some of it linger, get stuck beneath the seat, soak into the stone? You breathe through your nose, half hoping for the sharp scent of vinegar again. But it's not there. You shift your focus. Back to the design. Each seat is slightly angled, sloped forward to prevent splash, to let gravity help. And the opening in front of your feet, that's where you rinse the tersorium. A second trough, separate but connected, always flowing, always dark. This isn't an afterthought. It's architecture. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, many Roman latrines used a constant water curtain beneath the benches, a flush system, without flushing, and archaeological digs in Ostia and Pompeii confirm it. Channels lined with limestone, drainage grates, complex plumbing hidden under marble floors. But even so, there's doubt in your gut. Not just from what you've eaten, but from what you've seen. Because you're not alone in here. And not everyone rinses. Not everyone follows the rhythm, the courtesy, the flow. Sometimes the water isn't fast enough. Sometimes the channel clogs. And when that happens, someone has to fix it. You imagine the workers, the cleaners, crawling beneath the benches, hands in waste faces wrapped in cloth. Suddenly, you sit a little straighter, grateful for the stone, grateful for the distance, grateful that for now it's all being carried away. Or so you hope. You adjust your tunic, trying to create some kind of barrier. But there is none. To your left, a man exhales sharply. To your right, a woman coughs. You're not in a private stall. You're not separated by walls, or curtains, or doors. You are shoulder to shoulder with strangers, and there are no partitions, no boundaries, only stone. This is the Roman way. The latrine is one long bench, pockmarked with evenly spaced holes, a dozen, sometimes 20, all lined in a row like soldiers or statues, except no one is standing and no one is still. You glance down, not at them at your own knees. You count the distance between legs, a foot maybe, 2 if you're lucky. The person next to you shifts. Stone grinds softly under skin. A sigh escapes, but no one talks. Not here. You notice something, a pattern in the silence. People avoid eye contact. They stare straight ahead, or down, or at the small trough of water flowing in front of their feet. It's an unspoken rule. Don't look, don't speak, pretend you're alone. And in this pretend privacy, there's comfort. Not perfect, but enough. According to History.com, public latrines in ancient Rome were a social space, but also a space of etiquette. Inscriptions from Pompeii warn against lingering. Some even suggest preferred seating positions. Left-handed, you sat at the end, and the distance between holes, roughly 60 centimeters. Enough to sit, not enough to hide. You can hear someone humming, softly, a low tune, maybe to fill the silence, maybe to mask the sound of everything else. You join them in pretending. The person to your left stands. Their foot brushes yours. It's unintentional. But you flinch. The contact, though brief, breaks the spell. You remind yourself, this is normal. For them, Romans believed that bodily functions were natural, not shameful. To share space in this way wasn't disgraceful. It was efficient. It was civilized. Still, you long for distance, for quiet, for a wall. But all you have is the cool air, the rhythm of water, the rustle of cloth, and a row of strangers doing exactly what you're doing. Existing, relieving, enduring. You lower your eyes again, and so does the person beside you. Together, but separate. Connected, but anonymous. And in that strange stillness you find your place. Not just on the bench, but in the moment. A silent participant in a 2,000-year-old ritual. No walls, no shame. Just you. And them. You've been sitting here long enough to sense it now, a kind of rhythm. Not spoken, not enforced, but followed. A man enters. He nods slightly. Not at you. Not really, just in your direction. He chooses a spot 3 seats away, even though there's one closer. You notice that. Everyone seems to. It's an unwritten rule. Leave space if space allows. He sits down slowly, doesn't speak, doesn't hum. He stares at the floor, eyes soft-focused on nothing in particular. You feel no urge to introduce yourself, because here that would be strange. Conversation is rare. Voices stay low, quiet, like the whisper of flowing water underfoot. The latrine might be a public place, but it runs on silence. And when someone does speak, they do it gently, as if afraid to break the invisible thread that holds this space together. According to Britannica, Romans had a strong sense of decorum in communal spaces, especially in places where the body was exposed. To maintain order, customs emerged patterns of behavior passed down like family recipes, but without ingredients. Just feeling. Eye contact is avoided, always. Not because you're ashamed, but because it offers too much, too fast. A glance can turn this moment, this careful balance, into discomfort. So you keep your gaze soft, downward, toward the water, or the grain of the stone beneath your feet. There's another rule: don't linger. You don't stay after your business is done. No reading, no resting. In and out. Graffiti on latrine walls sometimes scolds those who break this rule. Don't sit too long, one message reads, or the smell will follow you home. You smile. Even in stone, Roman humor found its place. You shift slightly, aware of your surroundings, aware of the bodies beside you, but only just. It's strange how something so intimate can feel so distant. But that's the point. The rules, though silent, are designed to protect you, not from germs, but from exposure, from awkwardness, from feeling too close. You finish, you rise, and just as you do, someone else enters. They nod, you nod back, and the cycle continues. A shared ritual, unspoken, understood. Beyond the stone seats lay another unexpected function. You don't expect it at first. A voice, low, calm, casual. The bread market collapsed again this morning. You glance up, just slightly. 2 men a few seats down. One of them adjusts his toga. The other scratches his beard, nodding. They raise taxes on imported flour. Senator Lucullus is behind it, I'm sure. You're surprised, not by what they're saying, but where they're saying it. This is the latrine, a row of stone benches, no privacy, and yet, people talk. Not everyone, not always, but often enough that it becomes a kind of backdrop, voices drifting like steam in a bathhouse, soft, measured, as if the stone walls themselves are listening. Topics float in and out: politics, business, weather, wheat prices, rumors of war. Sometimes it's gossip, sometimes complaints, and sometimes, like now, it's about the sky. Storms coming in from the west, a woman mutters, settling onto the seat beside a sleeping child. Feels heavy in my bones. The other nods. She doesn't look up. No one needs to. These exchanges aren't deep. They're not meant to be. But they serve a purpose. They make the space feel normal. According to History.com, Roman latrines weren't just for hygiene. They were part of a daily rhythm, a communal place, a spot to pause, reflect, and yes, catch up. In Pompeii, graffiti scratched onto the walls of public toilets includes jokes about politicians' comments about food vendors, and even the occasional flirtation. One inscription reads, "I was here. I saw the man with the golden sandals. He does not wash." You smile. You begin to notice the etiquette. No one speaks loudly. Voices stay low, like secrets wrapped in steam. When someone raises their voice, it's jarring, unwelcome, a break in the softness of this strange, shared ritual. A man beside you clears his throat. Did you hear? He whispers Domitian banned chariot races again, claims they distract the soldiers. You nod, not because you agree, but because that's what one does here. Small talk in small moments on small stone seats. Not private, but not performative. Just enough to feel not alone. You shift your weight. The stone beneath you is still cool. Your hands rest lightly on your lap. You listen. Someone sneezes. A blessing is murmured, and just like that, the latrine becomes more than a necessity. It becomes a forum, not as grand as the Senate, not as loud as the marketplace, but quieter, closer, almost human. You shift slightly on the stone bench. As you do, your eyes drift to the wall beside you. At first glance, it's just aged plaster, cracked, worn, but then you notice it. Carved letters, scratched with a nail, a knife, maybe even a fingernail, wobbly lines, unfiltered words, graffiti. You lean in, slowly, carefully, reading sideways the way one does in a half-lit corridor. I came, I sat, I conquered. You blink, a smile forms despite yourself. There's more. Below it, someone else has replied, "No, you didn't. You ran at the smell." You almost laugh quietly, of course. It's like a conversation frozen in time. This isn't just vandalism. It's expression, a living wall of thoughts. Right here, in a place of waste and water. According to Wikipedia's page on Roman graffiti, these inscriptions were everywhere, on tavern walls, temples, alleyways. And yes, even toilets. The latrine became a kind of anonymous scroll, a place where truth could hide behind humor. There are jokes about sex, about bad food, about neighbors who borrow and never return. One says Lucia eats like a goddess, if the goddess is a goat. Another, beware of Marcus. He sings in the latrine. And then there's politics. Spolidius is full of crap, one message reads. Then, in smaller letters below, just like this latrine. You wonder how many officials walked in here, read these words, and said nothing. The latrine offered something rare, a place where the powerless could speak freely. The walls remember. They hold layers of voices, voices that history books often forget. One phrase catches your eye, death to boredom. Long live the mess. You don't know what it means. Maybe no one did. Maybe that was the point, but it stays with you like a whisper carved in stone. You reach out just for a second and trace the groove of a line. Rough, old, but still here, still speaking. This graffiti isn't decoration. It's defiance, connection. A moment of humanity carved where no one was watching, or so they thought. Another gust of wind flows through the open wall. You blink, and when you open your eyes, the wall is still talking. You think you're alone, but then someone chuckles. Not a laugh, just a quiet, breathy sound, like they're trying not to disturb the stones beneath them. You glance over. He's reading something on the wall, murmuring it again to himself. You lean back, look up. There it is. A crude drawing of a donkey wearing a senator's laurel. Below it, scratched in messy Latin, more wisdom in this beast than in the curia. You don't laugh. Not out loud. But something soft flickers behind your eyes. The Romans didn't save their humor for the stage. They brought it here to the places no one expected. Even Britannica mentions how Roman humor thrived in the lowliest places. Toilets, taverns, alleyways. The latrine wasn't sacred. It was strange. It was real. And sometimes it was funny. A man enters, settles beside you. He hums a song you vaguely recognize, then mutters, "They should charge admission for this seat. The view's better than my marriage." You don't reply, but you remember it. Laughter here becomes a kind of release. Like the other release, necessary, human. A joke you overheard yesterday returns to you. What did the goddess of hygiene say to the man with no tersorium silence? Then, the punchline. Guess you'll just have to wing it. It doesn't make sense, not really, but somehow it works. Maybe because everything about this moment is absurd. You're sitting beside strangers. Everyone is pretending not to notice each other. Yet here it is, humor cutting through the tension like a breeze. Graffiti jokes, passing quips, even songs. Some toilet walls were inscribed with verses rhyming rhythmic rude. One fragment, found in Herculaneum, reads, "He who enters with pride leaves lighter, though not in spirit." You smirk. Romans laughed at the body, at power, at the strange awkwardness of needing to poop in public. And sometimes they laughed at nothing at all. Like the word cacere, to defecate. It appeared so often in jokes that historians now call it a punchline verb. Like our version of to fart. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Humor made this place less uncomfortable, less silent, less alone. You close your eyes, someone hums. Someone mutters a joke about Saturn and his appetite. You don't need to get it. You just need to be here, breathing, sharing the moment. Stone, water, laughter. Even here, you shift your gaze. Not out of boredom, just curiosity. The wall beside you. It holds more than jokes. You trace a line, then a name, Severus. Etched deep. Not the emperor, at least you think not. But the timing fits. The style of script? Familiar. Maybe it was meant as praise, maybe as protest. Either way, the name remains. Across the empire, from Pompeii to Ostia, graffiti preserved names that official records never did. Or preserved them differently. History.com recounts how even figures like Nero, Caligula, and Cicero found themselves immortalized on public walls, sometimes glorified, often mocked. You squint at another line. Down with Florus. Simple, sharp. A message with no context but full of weight. Who was Florus? A corrupt magistrate, a rival merchant, you'll never know. But someone hated him enough to write it here, to carve it into stone where even waste ran past it. Sometimes the writing is cryptic, symbols, abbreviations, a fish with wings, a snake coiled around a letter, M. Were they codes, prayers, inside jokes? You imagine a young scribe off duty, scratching his teacher's name into the wall, not to honor him, but to make sure that name would never be forgotten. Not by the gods, not by time. Even Smithsonian Magazine notes that Roman toilets were more than sanitary stops. They were message boards, public space, shared memory. One tile bears the phrase, "M. Agrippa was here," and he stank like the Tiber. You chuckle. Marcus Agrippa, friend of Augustus, builder of aqueducts, now reduced to a bathroom joke. And yet, here he is. More vivid than in a marble bust. The walls did not flatter. They told the truth, or at least someone's truth. Scandals, affairs, political criticism, all passed through this space in whispers and scratches. One graffito from Pompeii reads, "I screwed the baker's wife and she liked it." Crude, yes, but also revealing. That baker might have been a city official, his wife connected to a senator. The latrine, a place to settle scores without ever being seen. You blink and it's just stone again, quiet, worn, still whispering. You wonder in 2,000 years what walls will hold your name, not your legacy. Just your name, written in a place where someone might read it, smile and keep going. You stand, not in haste, just in thought. Somewhere behind you, a breeze stirs the dust. And the wall remembers. You lower yourself onto the stone again. Familiar now. The cool curve, the distant sound of running water. And the voice next to you, low, casual. Not a greeting, a whisper. She's sleeping with the merchant's son. You don't respond, you just listen. Because in Rome, latrines were more than bathrooms. They were bulletin boards, unfiltered, anonymous, alive. No eyes meet, no names are spoken. But words float through steam and stone. According to Britannica, Roman latrines were often long communal spaces, rows of openings, no partitions. That meant bodies sat close, but words traveled closer. A sigh behind you. Did you hear about Senator Calvis? His villa burned down? They say it wasn't lightning. You shift. Was it arson? A jealous rival? No one knows, but everyone repeats. Even History.com notes that gossip moved through Rome faster than official decrees. And toilets, oddly, were transmission lines. Not everyone could read a scroll. Not everyone was welcome in the forum. But anyone could sit here. Senators, slaves, soldiers, vendors. Side by side, sharing silence and secrets. A man clears his throat 2 seats down. Flavius got arrested. Caught cheating weights in the market. Used hollow lead coins. Another adds almost as a joke. He always looked too clean, to be honest. You stifle a smile. It wasn't just news. It was judgment, echoed in stone. A 2004 excavation in Ostia uncovered graffiti with coded political commentary. Not on city walls, not in bedrooms, but here carved just above the bench line, where you couldn't help but read it. One scratched sentence reads, "The people stink more than the sewer." Is it satire or despair? In these moments you realize something. Latrines were social equalizers. No one was above the stink. And in shared discomfort, people shared more than waste. Scandal, speculation, philosophy, all flowed faster than the water beneath. Sometimes even history slipped in. They say the emperor is sick. His food taster disappeared last week. Is it true? You'll never know. But the moment hangs in the air like steam. In latrines, words weren't written. They were breathed, and once spoken, never retrieved. You finish, stand, wash your hands at the basin with water still cold from the aqueduct. Behind you, another voice begins, "Don't tell anyone but." You walk away, but the whisper stays, like the scent of oil and stone. And even as your feet hit the sunlit street, you know you'll tell someone, quietly, over wine. Or maybe tomorrow, right here again, because secrets in Rome. They were born in silence but raised in latrines. You sit again. But now you're noticing more. Not just the cold of the stone beneath you, but the way the seats are arranged, the spacing, the rhythm, each opening carved with deliberate precision. A curve smoothed by time and bodies, about 40 centimeters apart, just wide enough for a person to perch. Not too close, but not far enough for comfort either. There are no armrests, no partitions, no privacy. According to Wikipedia, standard Roman public latrines often featured long benches of stone or marble with evenly spaced holes about 18 to 20 inches apart. Designed for efficiency, not intimacy. You glance to your side. Someone is already there. Another will soon fill the space on your other side. It's like sitting on a marble pew in a temple of waste. The geometry was intentional. Some latrines in Ostia Antica held up to 20 seats in a single room arranged in a perfect semicircle, a communal embrace. Others, like those in the baths of Caracalla, were more luxurious, wider benches, smoother edges with water flowing beneath and behind. But the spacing, always the same. This wasn't just about removing waste. It was about managing crowds. You adjust your robe. Your knee touches the stone curve beside you. Awkward, but expected. A scholar from Smithsonian Magazine once noted, "In Roman latrines, you weren't meant to be alone. You were meant to be a part of a flow of people, of water, of conversation." The seat itself was oval, gently concave, carved with skill, durable enough for decades of use, weathered enough to feel soft beneath you. Sometimes a small slit extended toward the front, just wide enough for a tersorium to reach through. Sanitation by design. Even the height mattered. Most latrine benches were between 40-50 centimeters tall, similar to modern toilets. Not too low to squat uncomfortably, not too high for children or the elderly. Standardized, yet versatile. And beneath those seats, a channel of water, always moving, taking everything away. You look around. This isn't a random row of holes. It's infrastructure, planning, Roman engineering at its most unglamorous, yet most human. Because every seat tells a story. Of where people sat, how they waited, how close they came to strangers. You shift again. Still no eye contact. But your body is part of the architecture now. A silent element in a centuries-old system. And suddenly, you respect the bench. Not just for what it holds, but for what it represents. A shared need. solved through stone. But these seats sat above something more complex. You shift slightly on the stone, and for the first time, you glance down. Beneath the smooth seat, a channel flows, slow and steady, a dark stream glinting faintly in the dim light. It's not loud, just a soft trickle, constant, comforting in a way. This is Rome's real genius, because under every latrine bench beneath your feet, beneath your waist, there's a system that never stops working. A lead pipe, perhaps, a brick channel, a groove cut with precision. In the city of Rome, Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, carried waste away from homes, baths, and latrines. Built in the 6th century BCE and still in use centuries later. According to Britannica, it's one of the oldest and most advanced drainage systems in history. And now, you're part of it. Your bench connects to a shallow trench. That trench joins a wider one. Gravity does the rest. In larger latrines like those at Ostia Antica or Timgad in Algeria, fresh water ran in a separate channel just behind the seats. Clean water flowed behind you. Dirty water flowed below. It's all designed to keep things moving, keep smells down, keep disease at bay, or at least try to. The Romans didn't have germ theory, but they understood flow. They knew that waste left sitting caused problems, so they didn't let it sit. You watch a leaf float past in the wastewater, gone in seconds, and with it, your contribution to history. History.com notes that the Roman Empire had over 1,000 public latrines in operation at its peak, all relying on the same basic principle. Don't store waste, move it. Sometimes slaves were tasked with keeping the channels clear, using long poles to poke at clogs. Other times, stormwater helped flush everything out during rains. In private homes, the system was smaller, maybe just a pit or a pipe to the street. But in places like the baths of Caracalla or the Forum, it was architectural, almost elegant. The materials varied. Lead, of course, dangerous but durable. Terracotta pipes joined with lime mortar, stone gutters lined with polished bricks, built to last, and all of it hidden, invisible. But without it, Rome would have drowned in its own filth. You lean forward peering into the stream below. You don't want to fall in, but you can't help but admire it, because this isn't just plumbing. It's control. It's order. It's Rome. But even with the water flowing, privacy was still just an illusion. You inhale, slowly, expecting something worse, but the air isn't as bad as you thought. It doesn't smell clean exactly, but it's not overwhelming either. There's something moving, a current, gentle, unseen. It tickles your neck, brushes your ankles, as if the latrine itself is breathing. And in a way, it is. Roman latrines didn't just rely on water to keep things bearable. They relied on air. The Historia Augusta mentions Emperor Hadrian traveling with a portable toilet complete with airflow holes. Even in motion, even in silence, ventilation mattered. In public latrines, engineers carved narrow gaps near the roofline. Some were simple slits between bricks. Others were full openings, rectangular vents, angled to catch the breeze. Some latrines even had impluvia, open ceiling shafts designed to let in light and circulate the air. In places like Ostia Antica, archaeologists found flues, hidden ducts running through the walls, acting like lungs. Warm air would rise carrying odors upward and out. Britannica notes that Roman architecture often balanced function with form. Even in toilets, sometimes clay pipes were added to create passive airflow. As warm waste produced heat, it lifted the surrounding air. Cooler air rushed in from below, like a slow, invisible dance. You feel it now. That motion, that rhythm, it doesn't remove the smell completely, but it prevents it from suffocating you. And that's enough. There were risks, of course. Pliny the Elder warned about exploding toilets, methane gas igniting from oil lamps. So airflow wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. Roman engineers may not have understood chemical composition, but they knew that air needed to move. That pressure needed to balance. That stink, like sin, couldn't stay bottled up forever. Some homes even had underfloor channels, hollow bricks that let air snake through the structure. You wouldn't see them, but you'd feel them. A whisper at your feet, a draft on your cheek. This wasn't luxury. This was design, purposeful, precise. And as you sit there surrounded by stone and strangers, you realize something. You're not just sitting on a bench. You're part of a system. an ancient machine that moves water, waste, and wind, all working together to make this moment just a little more bearable. And yet, for all this elegance, you were still sitting on stone. 3.14. Stone metal and the comfort of cold 500 words. You shift your weight. The stone beneath you is cold, but somehow solid, comforting in a way. It's not crumbling clay, not soft mud. It's something made to last. You run your fingers along the edge of the seat. It's smooth. Too smooth for something ancient. Marble. Not the polished kind used in statues, but still elegant, flecked with tiny imperfections, worn down by hundreds, maybe thousands of other bodies that sat here before you. The Romans chose their materials carefully, not just for looks, but for function. Public latrines were often built from limestone, abundant, cheap, and easy to shape. It absorbed moisture, slowly helping keep the floor dry under constant use. But where budget allowed, wealthier buildings used marble. Not just for vanity. Marble was cooler in summer, resistant to mold, and easier to scrub clean. According to Britannica, this wasn't just style, it was hygiene. Marble didn't trap bacteria as easily. Its polished surface offered fewer places for germs to hide, and in a world without soap, that mattered. The seats themselves were often slabs carved with evenly spaced holes. Some even had grooves leading forward, a built-in splash control. And then there was the metal. Copper fixtures were common, door hinges, hooks for hanging tunics or cloaks, sometimes even pipes. But the most curious use, bronze spouts, used to direct water under the toilet benches, flushing waste away continuously. History. Com notes that bronze, though more expensive, resisted corrosion better than iron. It could withstand constant moisture, acidic runoff, and the wear of daily life. You imagine the builders, not sculptors but craftsmen, carving stone blocks to fit perfectly, fitting pipes with molten lead, creating a place for strangers to sit side by side and do the most human thing imaginable. Sometimes they even engraved little patterns, nothing grand, just lines or dots, or the faint outline of a leaf. You wonder if it was decoration or boredom. The floor beneath you is made of basalt, a volcanic rock brought in from miles away. Heavy, but nearly indestructible. In Ostia and Pompeii, archaeologists found latrines still intact after 2,000 years. Because of these materials. Because someone long ago decided that even toilets deserved to be built well. You glance at the walls, lime plaster, faded now but once painted with red or ochre. Nothing fancy, but not forgotten. Even here, in this space for waste, Rome left its mark, not in gold, but in stone. And when things broke, as all things do, someone had to fix them. You step in early. The latrine is empty. Sunlight spills in through the open roof, casting a soft, dusty glow across the stone seats. It smells better than usual. Not clean, but not foul. Someone was just here. Not to use it, but to fix it. You spot a wooden bucket half full of water, a long-handled brush rests beside it, and a worn leather satchel open, filled with tools, chisels, sponges, oil, and rope. In the quiet hours before the crowds arrived, this place belonged to someone else. The foricarius, the toilet worker. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was essential. According to Britannica, Roman latrines required daily upkeep. And it wasn't just about pouring water. Every morning the cleaner would walk the row of seats, checking for blockages. Sometimes cloth or twigs had been shoved into pipes, sometimes worse. Using a hooked rod, they'd fish out whatever didn't belong. They'd flush the channels by redirecting water from nearby fountains or cisterns. They'd scrub the marble with vinegar sand, and sometimes ash. The sponge on a stick, the tersorium, had to be cleaned too, soaked in salt water or vinegar and set out to dry. Or, in some cases, replaced entirely. It wasn't uncommon for public latrines to keep extra sponges hanging from hooks. They'd go missing, or fall in, or rot. The cleaner's job included replacing them, quietly, without fuss. History.com notes that latrines were often the target of small vandalism. People chipped away at the seats. They scrawled graffiti. Sometimes they stuffed the channels with leaves or cloth just to watch the water overflow. The cleaner fixed it, every time. Larger repairs like cracked stone or broken water channels required a team. A plumbarius skilled in working with lead might be called in to seal leaks. A mason would replace dislodged tiles. Carpenters maintained the roof beams, if there were any, and every few months the entire system had to be flushed. A surge of diverted water would be released to wash the waste toward the main sewer. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, and when it didn't, someone climbed down. Not every worker was a slave. Some were paid, poorly, but it was steady work. In Pompeii, graffiti on a latrine wall names a man called Marius who scraped filth but ate bread. That was the job, dirty, invisible, but vital. You look at the seats again, so clean you could almost call it dignified, not because of the marble, but because someone made it that way. Yet luxury wasn't for everyone. You're the first one in today. The stone feels cooler than usual beneath you, but the air it carries something else. Not just the usual mix of damp and decay, but a faint sharpness, astringent, like someone spilled sour wine into the air. It's vinegar. The Roman cleaner was just here, and in the ancient world, vinegar meant clean. In the absence of soap, the Romans turned to what they had: vinegar, salt, and herbs. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, wrote that vinegar could purify almost anything, from skin wounds, to water basins, to toilet seats. And that's exactly what they did. Every morning cleaners carried small clay jugs of vinegar mixed with water. They'd pour it over the stone, letting it trickle down the grooves between the seats. Sometimes they'd add a pinch of salt to scrub out stains. The combination sizzled faintly when it touched warm marble. You can hear it now, a whisper of chemical memory. Some mixed the vinegar with herbs, mint to mask the scent, thyme for its supposed cleansing power, even rue, bitter strong, believed to ward off illness. A sponge soaked in this mix would be rubbed across each latrine seat, then rinsed in a secondary bucket of cleaner water. It wasn't sterile by modern standards, but in the ancient world, it was a sacred routine. According to Smithsonian Magazine, the tersorium, the sponge on a stick, was also washed with vinegar daily. Some historians believe multiple sponges rotated throughout the day, soaking in buckets laced with salt and herbs until needed. In wealthier homes, attendants added perfumed oils to the cleaning mix. Just a few drops, not to kill bacteria, but to impress the nose. And if the vinegar ran low, there was ash. Collected from hearth fires, mixed with water or urine ash, made an early form of lye. Too harsh for marble, but used on stone or clay. It left behind a chalky finish, but a clean one. For centuries before soap was refined, this was enough. Vinegar for wiping, herbs for scent, ash for scrubbing. The tools were simple, cloths made from old tunic sponges on wooden sticks, handfuls of fine sand for stubborn stains. Inscriptions from Ostia Antica even mention rules about keeping the cleaning water separate from the drinking water. A practical precaution, and a quiet acknowledgement of risk. You shift slightly on the stone. The air still hums with vinegar. Your hands rest on your knees. You're not worried. Not exactly, but you're grateful that someone came before you and cleaned, and behind every clean surface, there was someone doing the dirty work. You hear it first, a soft clink of a bucket against stone, then a wet swish, and the slow shuffle of sandals. Someone's working already. He's not a priest, not a senator, not a merchant with rings and robes. But this man keeps the city cleaner than any of them. You're looking at a latrine attendant, a humble laborer, often a freedman, sometimes a slave. But without him, the empire would stink literally. His day begins before sunrise. Armed with buckets of vinegar, solution handfuls of sand, and a long-handled brush, he starts at one end of the latrine and scrubs in circular motions. Every seat, every trough, every sponge stick. In some public facilities like those in Ostia Antica, there were 2 workers per shift. One to clean, the other to fetch water from nearby fountains or cisterns. The historian Seneca once wrote, "Even the filthiest tasks must be done with dignity." And this job was exactly that. Dignified in its necessity, invisible in its performance. He empties the drainage basin, sludge, excrement, rotting leaves, and refills them with cleaner water. If there's a clog, he clears it with a hooked staff. If there's graffiti too crude, even for Rome, he scrapes it off. He's paid little, sometimes in bread, sometimes in coin, but often just room and board. Still, his role mattered. Records from Pompeii mention fines for facilities left unattended. Some latrines even had posted rota schedules naming which laborer was on duty which day. Accountability in stone. In temples, the job was sacred. The attendants wore simple linen and cleansed not just the latrine, but the symbolic space around it. Purity even in excretion. You shift slightly on your bench, imagining his hands rough cracked from vinegar, calloused from stone, but steady, reliable. Without him, the sponge wouldn't be rinsed, the floor would be slick, the air would be unbearable. He doesn't speak much. People look past him, but he knows the rhythms of this place better than anyone. Where the leaks happen, which seats squeak, who lingers too long. Sometimes he hums, a song from the countryside. It echoes gently down the row of empty holes. And for a moment, just a moment, you're grateful. Not to a god, not to Rome, but to him, the man with the bucket. They scrubbed, we sat. But how exactly did the water work? You don't hear a flush. Not like the click of a handle or the whoosh of modern plumbing. But there's a sound, a gentle trickle, constant, persistent, like a whisper that never ends. Beneath your feet, water flows. It moves through a narrow channel, aqueductus carved directly under the row of stone seats. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to carry everything away. The ancient Romans didn't just build aqueducts for drinking water. They built them for cleaning. Fresh water from distant hills, pulled by gravity alone, traveled through lead-lined pipes into reservoirs, then into the latrine troughs. Every public toilet was part of this invisible system. And as you sit, you begin to notice the rhythm. A low gurgle, a faint splash, then quiet again. Every few minutes a fresh wave of water flushes through the channel. It's not dramatic. It's soothing, predictable. You peek down through the stone hole. No moving parts, no machinery. Just a shallow stream, washing under you like a small river with a very specific purpose. Sometimes attendants added buckets of vinegar or warm water steeped in rosemary to help mask the smell. But mostly, it was water clean, constant, and quiet. The sponge-stick tersorium rested in a smaller gutter nearby. It, too, was washed by this flowing system. Shared, yes, but rinsed often. At the end of the channel sat a settling tank where solids sank and water could overflow into the larger Cloaca Maxima, Rome's greatest sewer. Built in the 6th century BCE, it carried waste out to the Tiber River, still flowing today. You might feel a sense of awe, or discomfort, or both, because in this moment beneath your bare thighs and worn tunic, you're sitting atop a marvel of engineering, one that never asks for attention, but always delivers peace of mind. Historians at Britannica describe Roman sanitation as unmatched in the ancient world. And here, right here, you understand why. There were failures, of course. Some latrines clogged, some flooded. But when it worked beautifully. A system of silent motion, always cleaning, always carrying, so that you didn't have to see what left you. You breathe deeper. The smell is faint. The water continues. And somehow, in the cold stone quiet, you feel safe. But privacy? That was never part of the design. You know about the sponge, the tersorium, soaked in vinegar, shared, sometimes unsettling. But that wasn't the only tool the Romans used to stay clean down there. Imagine this, you've just finished. You reach to your side, and instead of sponge, you find ash. Yes, wood ash. Fine, soft, dried and powdered from burned olive wood. It clings to moisture and odor, and it's surprisingly gentle. You take a pinch, dust it across yourself, then wipe with a scrap of linen. This was one of the oldest methods used before the sponge became common. In fact, across different regions of the empire, ash remained the standard for the poor, or for those far from the capital. Then there was sand, coarse, granular, stored in small clay bowls beside the latrine bench. You'd pour a little into your hand, or onto a cloth. The friction helped. The grains carried away what water could not. Not the most comfortable, but effective. Linen rags were another choice. Soft fabric torn from old tunics. Used once, then discarded or washed. In wealthier homes, they might be embroidered. Yes, embroidered. Not for show, but for distinction. To mark ownership. To ensure you didn't use someone else's cloth. Some Romans even infused their rags with oils, lavender, rose, thyme. To cleanse, to soothe, to feel, just for a moment, a little bit pampered in a place designed for release. And if you didn't have anything, you might reach for a shard of pottery. The Greeks called it a pessoi, a smooth disc of broken ceramic rounded at the edges. Some Romans copied this tradition. They'd keep a few pebbles or discs nearby. Wipe, rinse, repeat. Archaeologists have found piles of these near-ancient latrines, with wear marks, with traces of use, even with names scratched into the surface. Personal, practical. A little unsettling, perhaps, but that's hygiene without plumbing. What's most striking is the variety. Because Romans weren't bound to a single tool. They adapted. They mixed ash and vinegar. They layered sand with cloth. They made do with what they had, and in every method there was intention, a desire for cleanliness, for dignity, for comfort in a cold, stony place. You shift slightly on your own imaginary seat, maybe, reconsidering your own modern rituals, because compared to this, your bathroom is paradise. But it wasn't just about being clean. It was about being seen. You sit. The stone beneath you is smooth, still cold. But today, it feels cleaner. There's no trash beneath the bench, no lingering stench. The stream beneath flows freely, not by accident, because in Rome, cleanliness wasn't just personal. It was civic. It was pride. It was Roman. To be dirty was to be barbaric. And that was the worst insult of all. You hear the footsteps of a latrine attendant behind you, a man with a pail and a long-handled brush. He hums as he scrubs the stones, rinses the channel, replaces the vinegar water for the shared sponge. Not out of fear, but duty. Because the latrine wasn't just for you. It was for the city, the community. And when one person failed to keep it clean, everyone suffered. Roman thinkers like Vitruvius and Pliny the Elder wrote about hygiene in urban planning. They saw cleanliness as a mark of civilization, of logic, of moral superiority. Even the emperor cared. Vespasian, who taxed public urinals, famously told his son, "Money doesn't smell." But the unspoken truth was, this waste might be profitable, but it still had to be managed, minimized, made invisible. Public latrines were cleaned regularly. Graffiti was sometimes painted over. Fines were issued for improper disposal. Because to let filth spread meant letting shame spread. And in a city of marble statues and aqueducts, there was no room for shame. Children were taught it early. Elders enforced it sternly. Even the poor, when they could, contributed to communal hygiene. And here's the surprising part. Many Romans, rich or poor, felt pride in their public restrooms. These weren't hidden away like shameful secrets. They were public, open, and essential. And the cleaner your neighborhood's latrine, the more respected your street. This wasn't about OCD. It was about order, about being Roman, because for all their faults, the Romans understood one thing clearly: waste left alone becomes danger, to health, to status, to the fabric of society. So they flushed it, scrubbed it, organized it, and they believed deeply that how you managed your mess revealed who you really were. Yet luxury wasn't for everyone. You're not in a public latrine today. No stone bench, no row of strangers. Instead, there's a door, polished, heavy. It creaks as it opens, revealing a chamber tucked into the far end of a marble villa. This is your latrine, private, quiet, sanctioned by wealth. The walls are painted with delicate frescoes, birds' vines, gods watching over you. The floor is warmed by a hypocaust, the Roman underfloor heating system. Not cold stone beneath you now, but tile smooth and faintly warm. You sit alone. The seat isn't carved from the communal slabs of basalt. It's made of wood, or sometimes cushioned ivory, fitted perfectly for one person, you. Below, a custom-built waste channel connects your villa to the broader sewage system, but only after filtering through a cistern of clean water, sometimes perfumed with herbs or rose oil. It doesn't just remove the waste, it masks it, turns it invisible. Your tersorium not communal, fresh. Soaked in wine vinegar, delivered in a brass bowl with carved handles. No need to share. And when you're done, a servant enters, quietly, with more water, perhaps a towel. Because in elite Roman homes, the latrine was not simply functional. It was architectural, integrated into the bathing complex. A step between the tepidarium and the caldarium, between washing your body and relaxing your mind. In homes like Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii or the House of the Faun, archaeologists have found latrine rooms with mosaic floors, tiled drains, even ceilings painted with clouds as if to lighten the experience. And you wonder, was it just comfort? Or was it symbolism? Because for the elite, waste was to be controlled, hidden, just like poverty, just like disease. You close the door gently behind you, and no one outside would ever guess. In this marble cocoon, you feel no shame, just entitlement to warmth, to silence, to separation from the world of the communal poor. It was never just about function. It was identity. You weren't just using the toilet. You were reminding yourself who you were. These luxuries often came at a cost. You wake up to the clang of metal and barked orders. No velvet seat, no perfumed sponge. You're a Roman legionary, and when nature calls, it's just another part of the day's discipline. Outside the castrum, the military camp, there's a trench. Not just any trench. A latrine foci, a long, narrow latrine, dug carefully downwind and downslope from the main quarters. It's not hidden, but it's not random either. Roman engineers, following Vitruvius' principles, placed it where waste wouldn't seep back into tents or contaminate water. You line up with your comrades, 10 at a time. No walls, no shame. Each man squats above the narrow ditch cut at a slight angle to let runoff drain into a secondary trench. Sometimes the trench is lined with wooden planks, sometimes just earth. There's a bucket of water nearby, and next to it, the tersorium, a sponge on a stick. Shared, rinsed, reused. You try not to think too hard about that. A junior soldier keeps time. You don't linger. Not in this rank. Because even this simple act is part of the logistics of empire. The Roman army understood something radical sanitation equals strength. If one man gets dysentery, a cohort can fall. If a trench overflows into the water supply, a whole centuria could die before battle. So the latrine is not just a ditch. It's policy, it's medicine, it's survival. And it's checked, daily. By Optios junior officers trained to look for signs of disease, strange colors, unusual smells, even the frequency of use. Historians like Lawrence Kepi and evidence from Vindolanda in Britain suggest that latrines were among the first structures built when a new camp was formed before the barracks even. And nearby ash pits, where waste-soaked sand and used cloths are burned. Not just discarded, because nothing weakens an army faster than bad hygiene. You finish, you rinse, you stand. And just like everything else in the Roman military, you move on with efficiency. Not because it's glamorous, but because it's necessary. In contrast, latrines in the countryside told a humbler story. You wake before the sun. The cocks are still clearing their throats. The fields beyond your window glow faintly blue dew clinging to the tall grass. Your bones ache from yesterday's labor, clearing stones from the vineyard slope, hauling bundles of olive branches. And your stomach? It grumbles. But there's no door to open, no seat to warm, no privacy. You step outside, feet slipping into sandals still damp from the night. You grab a clay pot of water and make your way to the far side of the farmstead, where the fig trees grow dense and low. That's where the household latrine is, or rather the pit. It's just a trench dug last winter, lined with rough stones to keep the soil from collapsing. There's a worn plank balanced across it. Sometimes it shifts under your weight. You sit cautiously. The stone beneath you is cold. The morning breeze sneaks through your tunic, biting your skin. You look up, no roof, just sky, pale and silent. You can hear the goat stirring nearby. Someone else is already at the well. You try to be quick. There's a bucket beside the trench filled from the stream yesterday. You splash some over the stones, careful not to waste too much. Water is rationed. There is no sponge on a stick, no tersorium, just a scrap of linen rinsed after each use and hung on a peg near the granary. You try not to think about who used it last. There's no drainage system here, no aqueduct. Waste builds up. When the pit fills, you'll dig a new one. Farther from the vines this time. Sometimes when the wind is still, the smell carries back toward the kitchen. You finish. Pour another ladle of water to mask the remnants. You wish you had vinegar. Or wine. Even ashes. But this is the countryside. You use what you have. Still, you pause before standing. For a moment, this pit in the earth is yours alone. No one sees you, no one speaks. And in that silence, there's strange peace. The Romans built wonders you've heard, roads, arches, fountains. You wonder if they ever worried about flies, or hard stools, or winter wind freezing your thighs while you tried to squat and keep balance. You stand, step away, smooth the earth with your foot, not out of shame but habit, to keep the flies down, to keep the chickens out. Tomorrow you'll come back here again, and again the day after that. It's not pleasant, it's not clean, but it's survival, simple, bare. Roman on the very edge of the empire. In Rome, even modest comfort was something you had to afford. You're not poor, but you're not elite either. You live in a modest domus tucked between two bakeries in the Suburra district. Your family owns a small business, maybe textiles, maybe wine. And while you don't dine on silver plates, you do have walls, a roof, and a toilet. Not a grand one. There are no mosaics, no marble statues, no heating system under the floor. But it's yours, a small room at the back of the house, sometimes open to the kitchen, sometimes tucked behind a curtain. The seat is wood, worn smooth from use. It creaks when you sit, a single hole carved into a slab of stone with a channel beneath that leads to the neighborhood drain. The smell manageable. You keep jars of dried herbs nearby bay leaf, mint lavender sometimes tucked into cloth pouches, sometimes just scattered on the floor. Not for luxury, for masking. There's a basin too, small cracked. You fill it with rainwater collected in jars from the roof. Sometimes you boil it if you're worried. Mostly, you don't. Your tersorium, it's yours and your family's. You keep it in a ceramic jug of vinegar. Everyone knows to rinse it. No one talks about it. You don't have a servant to bring towels. You don't have polished bronze handles or perfumed cloths. But you have routine. You have rhythm. And you have pride in having your own space, one step above the street, one step below the villa. You don't need to walk to the public latrine in the middle of the night. You don't need to fear who's lurking behind the column. You're not rich, but you're safe. Archaeological finds in towns like Herculaneum and Pompeii have uncovered these modest latrines, wedged between kitchens and gardens, next to cisterns or stables. Some were shared by a few families, some were single-use, and many were directly above cesspits where waste collected until someone usually paid hauled it away. For the Roman middle class, sanitation wasn't a symbol of power. It was a sign of progress. You weren't poor enough to throw your waste into the street. You weren't rich enough to forget what waste even smelled like. You were in between. And it showed in your latrine. Functional, simple, enough. But even within this simplicity, there were expectations. Clean it. Use it discreetly. Don't let neighbors smell it. And don't talk about it at dinner. Because Roman modesty wasn't about hiding the act. It was about not making others think about it. Not pretending it didn't happen. Just pretending it was effortless. So you step in, close the curtain behind you, and sit. And for a brief moment, you're grateful. Because in this city of excess and extremes, your little latrine is just enough. But this comfort still wasn't universal. You wait outside the latrine, not because it's full, but because someone more important than you just walked in. You lower your eyes, shift your weight from foot to foot. Hope they won't take long, but they always do. You're not a citizen. You're not even free. You're a servant, a slave. And even when it comes to waste, rank decides when and how you go. In elite homes, slaves had to wait until their masters finished using the private latrine. Some were tasked with cleaning it, first warming the seat, even testing the water temperature used in the sponge basin. In public latrines, the rules were unofficial but clear. Wealthy citizens sat together. They entered in groups, spoke loudly, held sponges like scepters. You stood at the edge, watched, waited. Sometimes the sponge was dry by the time it was your turn. Sometimes the water basin was soiled. And no one cared. There were no attendants for people like you. No rose-scented vinegar. No privacy, no dignity. The Emperor Vespasian once imposed a urine tax, the vectigal urinae, on public urinals. He claimed even waste could profit the empire. And it did. Collectors harvested ammonia-rich urine for tanning leather and laundering togas. It was business. But for you, it was loss. A few coins to relieve yourself meant choosing between food and relief. Sometimes you just held it in, or found a dark alley, or didn't go at all. And when disease followed, when infection spread, no one asked why. Because the latrine was never just about hygiene. It was a mirror, and in that mirror you saw where you stood. Not just behind in line, but below, always below. These luxuries often came at a cost. To sit in warmth, to be alone, to flush waste without thought. All of that came with a price, and not just in coin, because even toilets in ancient Rome reflected the brutal math of privilege. Theme: the price of waste. You wouldn't think your urine was worth anything. Not really, but in ancient Rome, it was taxable. You've just relieved yourself in a public latrine. No flush, no privacy, just stone, sponge, and shared air. You step outside into the Roman sun, adjusting your tunic. A tax collector is waiting. Not for property, not for bread, but for your pee. They call it the vectigal urinae, the urine tax. Emperor Vespasian introduced it in the 1st century CE. And no, he didn't charge the poor directly. Instead, he taxed the collectors, those who gathered waste from public urinals and latrines, then sold it to tanners, fullers, and laundries. Because Roman urine wasn't waste, it was industry. It contained ammonia, perfect for bleaching clothes and softening leather. Your humble bodily function powered entire trades. But the law raised eyebrows. Even Vespasian's own son Titus questioned the dignity of profiting off such filth. The story goes, Vespasian held a coin to his son's nose, asked him if it smelled. Titus said no, and Vespasian replied, pecunia non ole, money doesn't stink. It became a saying, a shrug at morality, a reminder that even the most unpleasant things could be turned into profit. You think about it as you walk, how your body could be taxed indirectly, how the very thing you couldn't control, your natural need, could be monitored, monetized, and managed. And while the elite relieved themselves in perfumed privacy, you paid in dignity and indirectly in coin. Latrines weren't just civic utilities. They were revenue streams, proof that Rome's ingenuity extended not just to roads and aqueducts, but to the human body itself. Even your urine served the empire. And if even your urine had value, what did that mean for the poorest Romans? Because nothing in Rome was truly free. You're standing outside the latrine again. This time, not in a marble villa, not in a military camp, but in a crowded district near the Forum, maybe. The line stretches out the door. Someone behind you mutters about the smell. Someone else jokes about skipping dinner if the line doesn't move. And right beside the entrance, a man with a small wooden box. He doesn't smile. He just nods. You drop in a coin. A tiny bronze quadrans, about the size of your thumbnail. It's what buys you access. Not much. Not enough for a loaf of bread, but enough to enter, because in many parts of imperial Rome, public latrines weren't always free. They were part of the city's managed infrastructure, built by the state, yes, but maintained by contractors, local landlords, or even guilds. Someone had to pay the cleaners, the water handlers, the guards, so fees were charged. Sometimes it was a subscription system. You paid a monthly rate. Sometimes it was per use, like toll gates for your bowels. The historian Lindsay Allison Jones writes that some bathhouses where latrines were located even included the fee in the price of entry. 1 coin for a wash, another for relief. 2 coins, and you left clean in every sense. And the people, they didn't love it, but they accepted it, because cleanliness, privacy, even momentary, was worth a price. Especially when the alternative was a filthy alley or a bucket behind a wine shop. So you sit, the bench cold, the stone familiar, and you remind yourself that in Rome even going to the bathroom was part of the economy, a daily transaction, a quiet agreement between dignity and coin. But for the poor, even a single coin could mean going without relief. You reach into your satchel, fingers brush the bottom. Nothing, not a single coin. And suddenly, a basic human need becomes a decision. Because in ancient Rome, even relieving yourself had a price. A small fee, yes, a quadrans, here, a few asses there. But when you're poor, even that is weighty. Food or dignity, shelter or sanitation. You step away from the latrine queue, head down an alley, behind a bakery. No plumbing, no stone seat, just a corner, a shadow, a hope that no one sees. You're not alone. Historians from the Britannica and History.com suggest that the urban poor, especially in Rome's crowded tenements, insulae, had little to no access to proper latrines. Latrines were unevenly distributed. Public ones were often far from where the poorest lived. And even when nearby, they weren't always free. So people improvised. Buckets, chamber pots, windows. Yes, windows. Vessels of relief, they called them. Thrown out after dark, splashing onto the street. A dangerous rain of human waste. That's why laws were passed like the Lex Julia Municipalis, penalizing those who dumped waste from upper floors. But enforcement was rare, and for those below a walk at night meant dodging more than thieves. And there were consequences. Archaeological reports from Herculaneum show signs of typhoid and dysentery in skeletal remains. Fecal bacteria spread through poor sanitation. Disease thrived in alleys where waste was dumped. Children sickened, whole families gone. So when you couldn't pay the fee, you paid another price. Not always in money, but in health, in shame, in silence. And still life went on. People laughed, fell in love, went hungry, and held it in until they couldn't anymore. Because even the human body in ancient Rome bowed to the empire of coin. So the state stepped in with rules, restrictions, and consequences. You think stepping into a Roman latrine meant relief, but the moment you sit, you realize this was still Rome, still ruled, still watched, not by a soldier, not by a senator, but by signs, scratched into stone, etched into wood, hung above your head like gentle warnings or stern reminders. No loitering, no gambling, no business conducted here, no shouting, no food, no dogs, because even among waste there were boundaries. Ancient texts like the Lex Julia Municipalis and civic inscriptions uncovered in Ostia Antica reveal the Roman effort to regulate behavior in public latrines. This wasn't just for cleanliness, it was for order. Some latrines had posted time limits enforced not by guards, but by social pressure. You didn't linger, you didn't speak too loudly, you certainly didn't ask questions. There were fines for waste disposal in unauthorized places, punishments for defacing walls, penalties for sexual acts or solicitation, though in truth, some places turned a blind eye. Graffiti unearthed in Pompeii's latrines reflect this tension, jokes side by side with warnings. One wall reads, "Those who defecate without manners shall meet the wrath of Saturn." Was it serious? Was it satire? In Rome, the line blurred, but the message stood. Even the most natural acts required discipline. And so you learn to fall in line. You don't rush, but you don't delay. You sit, you finish, you go. And in doing so, you avoid not only shame, but a fine. Maybe even a slap from a city official. Because Rome worked like that. Everything from street traffic to sewer smells was cataloged, debated, controlled. So while the seat beneath you is stone, the rules wrapped around you are invisible, but firm. And when those rules were broken, Rome made sure you felt it. You didn't think it mattered. Just a quick moment. A shortcut through the wrong archway. A careless gesture. A message scratched into stone. But here in Rome, even your waste had consequences. Public latrines were watched not always by eyes, but by ears. A misplaced word. A private deal made in whispers. Or worse, solicitation, theft, sacrilege. And when caught, punishment came quickly. Sometimes in coin, sometimes in blood. In the preserved municipal records from Pompeii and Ostia, we see cases of fines levied for urinating in unauthorized places. Even children could be scolded by public officials. A broken tersorium wasn't just annoying, it was property damage. One fine reads 20 sestertii for defacing lavatory wall with images offensive to Juno. There were rumors told in half-jokes about men being beaten with rods for using a priest's private stall during festivals. Satirical poets like Juvenal mocked those who bribed their way into elite latrines only to be tossed out by slaves. And in darker cases, there were public shaming rituals. Imagine this, you dragged out from the latrine by two lictors, your tunic half-wrapped, a crowd watching, your crime you sold love potions under the marble arch, or whispered secrets from the Senate floor, or simply stayed too long too often. The worst punishment, banishment not from Rome, but from its bathrooms. A civic order, barring someone from using any public latrine. The humiliation, the isolation. Because, in a city of millions, relief was a right, but also a privilege. And when that privilege was revoked, you were left wandering, begging for back alleys, risking disease, losing your place in the rhythm of daily Roman life. It was never just about rules. It was about being seen, obeying them, being part of the system. And when you fell out, the whole city noticed. And beneath all these rules and risks lurked something else, something darker, more dangerous. You reach for your belt. The small pouch, your only coins, is gone. In the silence of the latrine, you hadn't even noticed, but someone did. Because in Rome, even the dirtiest corners were watched. Public latrines were perfect for thieves. People came in, distracted, vulnerable. Robes pulled aside, focus elsewhere, and hands busy with other matters. According to archaeological studies from Ostia Antica, the design of Roman latrines, long benches, shared space. No doors created the perfect cover for petty crime. You sat inches from strangers, your tunic folded awkwardly, your satchel draped behind you, and if you brought a servant, you likely sent them away for privacy. That's when they struck. Roman writer Plautus, in his plays, makes several mocking references to latrine thieves, petty crooks so brazen they would swipe sandals or steal rings straight from a man's hand while he reached for the tersorium. One inscription, scratched into the latrine wall of Herculaneum, reads, "Beware your purse while you empty your bowels." Some criminals didn't just take, they waited, listened, the echo of coins falling into a money bag, the whisper of silver. And sometimes it wasn't just for money, jewelry, sealed letters, even legal contracts. Because Roman men often carried their affairs in folded leather packets tied to their waist. And in a moment of release, they became targets. Did authorities intervene? Rarely. Thieves knew which latrines were busiest, which hours were most chaotic. And they moved quickly gone by the time you stood, adjusted your cloak, and realized the loss. Some latrines even had guards stationed nearby, not for cleanliness, but for control, especially near the forum or temples. Still, theft remained common enough that writers like Martial and Seneca joked about it openly, as if being robbed mid-defecation was just another Roman rite of passage. And you walk out of the latrine, lighter than you entered, not just in body but in coin. And you wonder, how many others walked out the same way? You stop at the roadside. The imperial caravan halts. A dust trail lingers in the Syrian air. You dismount, just for a moment. Even an emperor has bodily needs. It's April 8th, 217 CE. And you are Caracalla, ruler of the Roman Empire. You step away from your guards, not far, just enough for privacy, or what little of it power allows. The records say you were relieving yourself. Some say squatting by the road, others suggest a makeshift latrine station was nearby. But all agree on one thing, you never stood back up. A man approached from behind, quiet, deliberate, with a blade drawn. According to Cassius Dio, the historian, it was Julius Martialis, a disgruntled soldier. His grievance personal. His brother had been executed on Caracalla's order. And now vengeance. The dagger slid through your side, shocking your guards into chaos. Your body collapsed into the dust. Your imperial robe soaked with blood, and maybe something more. They say your eyes were open, surprised, not by death, but by where it found you. Not on the battlefield, not in a palace, not even in a bath, but here, by the side of the road, pants down, vulnerable, human. Your killer was immediately struck down, but the message lingered. Power did not protect you in that moment. Not the purple cloak, not the legions, not your gods, only the silence of dirt and the indignity of dying mid-relief. The Historia. Augusta hints that Caracalla's death was more than just a political shift. It became symbolic. The emperor, who ruled with cruelty, whose policies bankrupted the empire, whose paranoia consumed his advisors, was brought down at his most undignified. Roman poets would later use it as metaphor. No matter how high you rise, your end might still come while squatting. And you wonder, as you sit in your own latrine tonight, who watched him fall, and how did they tell the story after? But not every danger in a latrine came with a dagger. Some came in whispers, in touches. In the shadows when no one looked. You sit down, not to talk, not to think, just to relieve yourself. But something's off. The stone beneath you feels colder than usual. The quiet murmur of the public latrine isn't so quiet today. Footsteps shuffle, too close, too slow. You keep your gaze low, because in places like this, Privacy isn't a right, it's a hope, and hope is a fragile thing in Rome, for women especially. Roman latrines were almost always unisex. No stalls, no curtains, no locked doors, just a row of open seats, shoulder to shoulder, and the illusion of modesty. You remember what Seneca wrote, "What is modesty in a city where nothing is hidden?" There were reports even in the writings of Juvenal and Martial of latrines being places of assault, where proximity blurred boundaries, where shame silenced cries. The Lex Julia de Adulterius Coercendis, a Roman law intended to regulate sexual behavior, rarely protected women in public. Assault in a latrine, that wasn't adultery. That was unfortunate, forgettable. In Pompeii, archaeologists found graffiti near latrines, naming women, mocking them, rating them, accusing them. Sometimes the graffiti celebrated forced acts as jokes. Other times, it was just a name, scrawled beside a crude drawing. A mark of shame they'd never consent to. You shift in your seat, now aware of how exposed your body is. The bench offers no protection, and neither does the law. Even slaves who cleaned these latrines were often victims, seen as property, treated as entertainment. No consent needed, no justice offered. A whisper becomes a hand becomes pressure, and no one looks, because no one wants to be next. You wonder how many stories ended here, never told, never believed, because in the Roman world, latrines weren't neutral. They were spaces of vulnerability, and for too many, danger didn't come with a sword. It came with silence, and stayed long after you left the seat. But sometimes, words could be just as dangerous, especially when whispered behind walls, or carved into stone. You speak softly, because in here even the stones seem to have ears. You're sitting on a latrine bench, half listening to the man 2 seats down. His tone casual, his words not. He names a senator, mentions a vote, and something about bribes. You weren't supposed to hear that. But he's too used to being invisible, too used to assuming no one listens when they squat. But someone always does. In ancient Rome, where alliances were fragile and betrayal was currency, even public toilets became places of surveillance. The Senate House might have held the laws, but latrines held the truth. It was said that Emperor Domitian, paranoid to the bone, used servants to eavesdrop in places no one expected: baths, bedrooms, latrines. Anywhere, words fell unguarded, and here people talked. Maybe they felt safe. Maybe they felt unseen, but that was the trick. In places of shared vulnerability, men dropped more than just waste, they dropped their masks. Historians like Suetonius noted how emperors like Tiberius believed in gathering intelligence from the lowest places, literally. In one letter, a disgraced senator accused of treason swore he'd been overheard in a latrine complaining about tax reforms. That was all it took. Even graffiti carved into the stone could be used as evidence. A name mocked, a figure criticized, a phrase misunderstood. And suddenly you're on trial. The walls didn't echo, they remembered. You keep your mouth shut now. Because this seat isn't just cold, it's exposed, and information here is currency. You lower your gaze, not from shame but from calculation. Because in Rome, survival wasn't about innocence. It was about discretion, and knowing which words to flush away and which to bury deeper. But not everyone who entered left with secrets. Some never left at all. You're small, maybe 5, maybe 7, old enough to follow your mother, too young to be left alone. The latrine is dark, damp, echoing. Voices bounce off stone walls. Water trickles beneath your feet. You're not sure where it's going. She tells you to wait, but curiosity pulls harder than caution. You tiptoe closer to the stone bench. There are holes large enough for a grown man, larger still when you're a child. You peek in. There's movement below. A rat. A shadow. You step back. Quickly. Not all were as lucky. Ancient sources mention it briefly, almost like a footnote. Children slipping through latrine holes, falling into cesspits. Some were rescued, others weren't. In Herculaneum, archaeologists found a child's sandal stuck in the waste duct of a public toilet. Too small for an adult, too worn to be recent. No bones were found, but the silence was loud enough. Roman engineers designed latrines for adults. Standard sizes, standard spacing, no railings, no warnings. And in crowded cities like Rome or Ostia, children accompanied parents everywhere, including to the latrine. Sometimes they waited outside, Other times, they stood beside, or climbed just to see. And below those benches, flowing waste, sharp stones, sometimes snakes, even a sudden backflow of gases that could suffocate in seconds. Pliny the Elder warned of it vapors from the sewers that kill birds in flight. How much more dangerous for a child? The poor had it worse. Without private toilets, their children used public latrines early. No guards, no supervision, no safety net. And even when they survived, they were rarely clean. Skin infections, parasites, diseases that clung to their small bodies long after the trip ended. You sit on your mother's lap now, too afraid to approach the bench. She holds you tighter, not just out of love, but out of fear, because in Rome, even the most basic acts carried risks. And for the smallest among them, a toilet wasn't a relief. It was a threat. But sometimes the fear didn't come from what lurked below, but from stories whispered above. The ghost beneath the bench. In the quiet of night, after the city had settled into its hush, strange sounds sometimes echoed beneath the stone seats of the public latrines. Not the usual trickle of water or rustling of sandals. No, these were sharp, deliberate. Like the creak of leather armor, the drag of a scabbard, a low sigh. According to Roman folklore, the source of these disturbances was not a rat, not a thief, but a ghost. They said he was a soldier, a centurion once proud, stationed in the heart of Rome. And he died, not on the battlefield, but here in the most undignified way. Stabbed through the ribs while relieving himself. A political target, some whispered, a jealous rival, others said. But the truth was buried with him beneath the tiles. From that day on, the latrine in Reggio 7th gained a reputation. People said if you sat there past midnight, you might feel a cold breeze against your ankle, or hear a whisper just above the splash of water. No one ever lingered long enough to decipher the words. Graffiti began to appear near the haunted bench. Warnings, prayers, jokes turned into superstitions. Some carved a symbol of Minerva into the seat before using it, hoping her wisdom might shield them. Others refused to sit at all, choosing discomfort over the chance of a ghostly encounter. One version of the tale says the ghost seeks justice, that he appears only to those with hidden guilt. Another says he's just lonely, doomed to haunt the last place he ever felt alive. Whether true or not, every Roman knew the story. Parents warned their children. Soldiers traded versions over campfires. And even today, archaeologists speak of odd acoustics and sudden chills when excavating latrine sites. Because even among the ruins, some legends don't die. A tersorium left behind in a dimly lit corner of a latrine near the forum, its stick rotted but the sponge curiously intact. Rumor had it that it belonged to a senator once accused of treason. After a mysterious illness befell him and his entire household, this sponge was all that remained. It became the stuff of whispers. Some said anyone who used it fell ill within days. Others claimed it triggered visions, hallucinations, so vivid they drove people mad. A few believed the sponge itself was possessed, imbued with the last breath of its owner, cursed to pass on his guilt. Graffiti, scratched into the stone wall beside it, read, "Touch and perish." Despite warnings, accidents happened. A traveling merchant once ignored the signs and used the cursed tersorium. He vanished 3 nights later. His sandals were found neatly placed outside the latrine. Another tale involved a young scribe who dared to write about the sponge in satire. By the week's end, he was bedridden, raving about shadows moving in his room, the scent of vinegar following him, even in dreams. Priests from a nearby temple eventually intervened. They performed a cleansing ritual and removed the tersorium, sealing it within a clay jar and burying it beneath a column of broken statues. But even then, people claimed to hear faint whispers echoing in that corner of the latrine. The story endured. Parents told their children never to pick up anything left in a public restroom. Elders swore by the tale, using it as a lesson about hubris, hygiene, and the unseen weight of shame. Because in ancient Rome, even something as simple as a sponge could carry the weight of a curse. You sit alone. The stone beneath you is cold, but that's not what sends a chill through your spine. It's the sound. Soft, slippery. Not water, not footsteps, not rats. It's a whisper, rising from the hole beneath you, as if the earth itself had something to say. In ancient Rome, this wasn't just your imagination. Whispers in the drain were feared, spoken of in hushed voices, passed from mother to child, scribe to apprentice. They believed the sewers, vast and dark, were more than tunnels. They were channels to the underworld, places where voices of the dead could slip through cracks in the stone. And latrines were doorways. You weren't just relieving yourself. You were sitting atop a portal. If you heard a whisper, especially at dawn or dusk, it meant something. Some believed it was a warning, others a curse, and just a few claimed it was a message from someone long gone. There are records, yes, even written, of citizens reporting phrases murmured from beneath leave now. "He knows. I remember you." Seneca himself joked about the voices heard in drains, though some believe he wasn't joking at all. The philosopher Musonius Rufus once argued that a pure conscience needn't fear the drain. But not everyone was comforted by Stoic logic when their legs trembled above a dark opening. Temples began offering charms. Tiny lead scrolls inscribed with prayers flushed into the cloaca maxima, not to cleanse waste, but to silence voices. Some homes installed bronze grates under the toilet seat, not to catch thieves or rats, but to block sound, to stop whatever was down there from reaching up. And still, sometimes late at night, the whispers came. A baker's assistant in Trastevere once claimed the drain called his name. He stopped using latrines, refused to sit on stone. Days later, he was found digging furiously in a drainage ditch, eyes wide, muttering about voices wanting him back. The story spread, and even centuries later, archaeologists working around ancient latrines have reported strange echoes, shifting air currents, an odd sense of being watched from below. You tell yourself it's just wind, just stone and water. But tonight, when you hear a voice rise from the dark, will you listen? They say Rome was built on 7 hills, but it was held together by one sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Drain, a marvel of Roman engineering, wide enough to walk through, deep enough to swallow a cart. It carried waste from temples, bathhouses, and hundreds of latrines across the city. But the Romans believed it carried more than filth. They believed it carried a guardian, a creature, a demon. Older than the city itself, some said, a spirit of the Tiber, twisted by centuries of rot. It slept beneath the streets, deep in the heart of the Cloaca Maxima. And it woke only when disrespected, not with words, but with waste. The legend went like this: if someone used the latrine with cruelty in their heart, if they mocked the poor, defiled a sacred symbol, or took more than their share of water, the demon would know. It would taste their wrongness in the flow, and it would come for them. There were stories of men disappearing mid-defecation, of screams echoing through the pipes, of sudden floods surging upward through latrine seats, drowning only one unlucky soul while others sat dry, just feet away. Pliny the Elder wrote of a senator who installed gold fixtures in his private latrine. Days later, his house flooded, only his latrine destroyed, the rest untouched. Workers claimed they heard a growl from the drain. To calm the demon, Romans made offerings, tiny statues, burned herbs, even whispered apologies before flushing. Some temples had priests assigned not to the altar, but to the sewers. They called them flaminis cloacarii, keepers of the drain. They wore white and walked barefoot, their duty to bless the water and appease the beast below. And still, the stories spread. A child in Subura vanished after laughing at a beggar who soiled himself. His mother claimed she heard gurgling laughter from the latrine that night. A merchant who sold counterfeit tersoria was found wedged in a storm drain, eyes open, face contorted not with pain, but with fear. Even today, when archaeologists enter the ancient tunnels beneath Rome, they report odd echoes, unexplainable wind shifts, and sometimes the feeling of being followed by something large, silent, and unseen. Maybe it was a myth. Or maybe, in a city built on waste, something ancient waited to judge those who abused it. Because in Rome, even the sewers had teeth. She wasn't found in a temple, not under marble columns or beside incense-burned altars. No, she sat by the sewer, wrapped in damp robes, eyelids fluttering like moths. And the Romans called her the latrine oracle. According to whispered legend, she had once been a Vestal virgin, sworn to purity, silence, fire. But something changed, a vision, a rupture, a curse. Banished from the temple, she wandered until she found refuge in the warm mist rising from a drainage tunnel just beyond the Aventine Hill. And there she listened. They said she could hear futures in the flow of sewage, that each rush of waste carried pieces of a life, regret, love, betrayal, washed from the city above. You didn't ask her directly. You left your question carved on a wax tablet, set it beside the water. And if she chose to answer, she would whisper your fate from the shadows. Sometimes it came true. A merchant ignored her warning, beware the woman with honeyed eyes. He died months later, poisoned by his mistress. A senator asked if his son would survive a voyage. The oracle sent back a single fig. Rotten. His ship sank in the Ionian Sea. Of course, many called her mad, filthy, possessed, but late at night, torches still flickered outside her cave. People wanted to know. And she never asked for coin, only that you flushed your shame before asking your question. Roman poets mentioned her in passing, never by name, just as she who listens beneath. A philosopher wrote, even the filthiest current may reflect divine order. Another warned, beware the wisdom that rises from decay. She vanished eventually. Some say she drowned. Others believe she was silenced by the Senate, too many secrets leaking upward. A few believe that she became part of the drain itself. Her voice dissolved into the murmuring echo of every Roman latrine. And if you ever sit quietly, and the water below seems to ripple strangely, listen. She might still be answering. Danger took a different shape for women. You're a woman in ancient Rome. You feel it most when nature calls. Because when you enter the public latrine, there is no curtain, no partition, no sign that says women only. It's just stone, open, cold, and filled with men. Roman public latrines were by design unisex. They were engineered for function, not modesty, and that meant, like many things in Rome, comfort was not equally distributed. You sit, if you dare, beside men discussing grain prices or gladiator matches. You keep your eyes low. You hold your breath. Not because of the smell, though it's there, but because of the tension. The way conversations shift when you enter. The glances, the silence. It wasn't just discomfort. It was vulnerability. Roman clothing, especially the stola or tunica, was not designed for speed or convenience. Adjusting your layers in a public unguarded latrine meant risk exposing more than intended, or worse, inviting unwanted attention. Some women held it in, for hours. They waited until darkness fell, or latrines were empty. But that brought its own dangers. Others whispered of squatting in alleyways behind market stalls, only to be caught fined or worse, harassed. There were no menstrual facilities, no sanitary provisions, no one left offerings for hygiene. Not unless you brought your own cloth, your own vinegar, your own silence. You overheard men joke about women taking too long or splashing too loud, but you didn't laugh, because every trip to the latrine wasn't just physical relief. It was negotiation, of space, of safety, of dignity. In wealthier districts, some homes installed private chambers for female guests. But for the vast majority, especially freed women servants or market-goers, there was no such luxury. Archaeologists found graffiti near latrines that referenced women, crude jokes, warnings, crude compliments. It was proof, at least, that women were there and noticed, but rarely welcomed. Roman writers barely mentioned women in latrine contexts, perhaps out of politeness, perhaps out of denial. But their silence speaks louder. Because for Roman women, the unisex latrine was not a shared space. It was an intrusion, and every time you entered you felt the imbalance carved into the stone. You step out of the shadows and into the sunlight only to be reminded of your place. Because in Rome, even your right to relieve yourself was determined by your purse. For the wealthy, a latrine was a room of silence and marble. Frescoed walls, heated floors, servants waiting discreetly outside, their tersorium clean, fresh, private. They never waited, never wandered, never worried. But you're not wealthy. You sell olives in the forum, or stitch sandals by the roadside, or sweep temple steps for a few denarii. And when your bladder aches, you don't walk into a villa. You wait, sometimes hours, because the nearest public latrine is full, or broken, or crawling with flies. And when you do find a seat, there's a line. No doors, no partitions, just strangers' shoulders pressed too close, and the unblinking stares of men who never learn to look away. The water smells off. The sponge has been reused too many times. There's no vinegar left in the bucket. You hold your breath, not just because of the stench, but because you're trying not to cry. Some days the guards won't even let you in, close for repairs. But the patrician who just walked past was welcomed with a nod. Other days, the entrance fee, a single quadrans, is more than you have. So you improvise. A clay pot behind your stall, a dark corner of an alley, always with one ear open, always ready to run. It's humiliating and dangerous. For rich women, even modesty was a commodity. Some had attendants to guard their doors to shield them while they squatted, but you are alone. One wrong glance, one wrong man, and your day is ruined, your name smeared. There were laws meant to regulate access, but who enforced them for the poor? Graffiti in working-class districts shows a different kind of latrine humor, dark, bitter, and often angry. Lines like "only the rich can shit in peace," and they weren't wrong. Access to a clean, safe latrine wasn't a right in ancient Rome. It was a reward, for birth, for gold, for being seen as worth protecting. So you learn to hold it, to stay quiet, to carry your shame like a coin purse, light hidden and always half empty. You learn to read time, not by the sun, but by the silence. Because in the crowded alleys of Rome, women didn't ask for space. They waited for it, created it in the hours when no one else dared to go. There were no formal schedules carved into stone, no law stating, "this hour is for women." But among market-goers, freed women, and street vendors, it was known. The latrine at dawn, the latrine at dusk. These were the hours when women moved swiftly, silently together. Like birds landing and leaving a well. Some came in pairs, some alone, eyes always scanning hands tight around their baskets. The city was loud, but the latrine in those windows of time was almost sacred. Not peaceful, never fully, but less threatening. The guards looked away. The men stayed home, and for 15 minutes, maybe 30, there was a fragile hush, just enough to squat, to clean, to breathe. In some neighborhoods, women whispered about the widow's hour right after the midday meal when older men napped and the streets grew still. Others claimed the baker's hour was safest, before first light, when wives delivered bread and stole a moment of privacy before the city woke. Graffiti found near Subura latrines mention odd markings. A simple symbol scratched into stone, a sign among women that now is safe. But nothing lasted. Sometimes men ignored the unspoken rules, drunk, curious, cruel. Sometimes women were followed out of the latrine and into darker corners, because no rule protected these hours. Only habit, only hope. A few wealthier women hired slaves to hold space, standing in the doorway until their mistress arrived, but most had no such luxury. So the system remained quiet, fragile, unwritten, an underground schedule that pulsed like a second city beneath the marble one. Historians rarely mention it. Documents are silent, but the patterns show in the wear on the stone, certain seats smoothed more than others, as if used in rotation. And you wonder, how many women passed through timing their dignity between the heartbeat of men, not because they were weaker, but because they had to be wiser. Because in Rome, even your right to use the toilet had to be negotiated with the clock. The walls spoke, not in marble inscriptions or golden plaques, but in scratches, crude, desperate, quietly defiant. You enter a public latrine, and just above the bench, carved with a dull knife or sharpened tile, you see it. He waits after sunset. The letters crooked, but the message clear. These weren't decorations. They were warnings, left behind by women for other women, because no one else was listening. In ancient Roman latrines, graffiti was everywhere, some funny, some vulgar, but in certain corners, the tone shifted. Do not sit alone. Watch the shadows near the drain. He grabs from behind. Graffiti wasn't censored. It was anonymous, and that gave women a voice, one they didn't always have on the streets or in the courts. One message in Reggio 5 read, "Touch your hair twice if he follows." A coded signal. A call for help. Another faint, but still visible beneath layers of time. Trust no priest here. An accusation. A memory. A rumor too dangerous to speak aloud. Sometimes the graffiti included symbols, circles with slashes, hands arrows. A silent system of survival passed down without parchment. Modern archaeologists once dismissed these carvings as jokes or meaningless scrawls. But deeper analysis, especially at latrines, near markets, and temples, revealed patterns. Clusters of messages near corners with poor lighting. Warnings always facing east where the morning crowd entered. Some graffiti even listed names. Juno's handmaid was never seen again. Mira warned you. Was Mira real? Does it matter? In a world where women's stories often vanished beneath the weight of empire, these scratchings endured, proof that they saw each other, warned each other, protected each other when no one else would. You run your fingers across one such line, now barely legible. You whisper it under your breath. Then you sit, eyes on the door, back straight. Because she wrote it for you. And you'll remember. And still their stories echo in the stones they left behind. You enter a latrine in Herculaneum, now a ruin, then a busy street-side stop. But this one feels different. Along the edge of one stone seat, you notice it faint, but deliberate, Claudia. A name carved low where the thigh would rest. Not graffiti, not a joke. It's not alone. Nearby seats carry other names, Livia, Tullia, Marcia, women's names, carved in the same hand. Not prayers, not curses, signatures. Archaeologists first assumed it was a male gesture, a marking of conquest. But deeper study, context, location, frequency suggests otherwise. This wasn't vulgarity, it was presence. Perhaps Claudia carved her name during a pause, half bored, half amused. Or perhaps it was a quiet rebellion. I was here, I existed, I sat just like you, because in a world where women's names were often erased or hidden behind fathers and husbands, this stone remembered. You trace the edge of the seat with your fingers, and for a moment, you're not alone. In Pompeii, not far from the House of the Golden Cupids, archaeologists uncovered something rare. A latrine, private, tucked into a back hallway, still intact. Mosaic floor, painted ceiling, and along the rim of the waste channel residues of lavender oil and myrrh. The hypothesis: it was a women's space. Not because of the perfume, though, that mattered, but because of the burnt offerings nearby. Tiny clay figurines, Venus Fortuna, a mother nursing a child, placed carefully, left purposefully. The villa's matron may have used the latrine not just for relief, but for ritual. A moment alone with the gods. You imagine her now, gathering her dress, sitting in silence, whispering a wish for fertility, or safety, or love, then rising, leaving behind only the scent of flowers and smoke. Even here among waste and water, she carved out a sacred moment. Because to be a woman in Rome meant transforming what little you had into something meaningful. Even a toilet. In a latrine near the baths of Caracalla, a tile fragment was found scratched with Latin script, Domina nocte non vadit sola. Mistress does not go alone at night. Simple. Matter of fact. Scholars believe it was written by a servant, a female slave offering a reminder, or perhaps a warning to her mistress. No names, no details. Just a rule. And beneath it, a crude sketch, 2 figures, one small one, large, holding a torch. You picture her, the slave girl, waiting outside the latrine door, torch in hand, listening, watching. Because at night, even a latrine could become a trap. It wasn't just loyalty. It was learned wisdom, passed silently from girl to girl. A code of caution. The Romans didn't write manuals on how women should use public spaces. So the women wrote their own. Into walls, onto tiles. Into the habits they taught each other without speaking. And when they vanished, the clay remembered. In the remains of Ostia Antica beside a latrine used by market vendors, archaeologists found something unexpected. A tiny bronze charm shaped like a uterus. It was nestled behind a stone, along with a linen cloth and a sliver of dried herbs. The theory, a midwife's offering. Or a ritual by a woman praying for safe birth. Some believe this corner was quietly known as the birthing bench, not for delivering babies, but for asking the gods to help bring them. Roman women often turned to Fortuna or Diana in private prayers, especially in places where the body was already exposed. You imagine her sitting on the cold stone, pressing the charm to her belly, murmuring a name not yet born. There was no temple nearby, no priestess waiting, just stone and hope and a little space carved out for faith. In an upper-class villa, near the Aventine Hill, an excavation revealed a latrine room. and a surprise. On the wall, a fresco not of gods or heroes, but of a woman sitting calmly, head bowed, surrounded by birds. Scholars puzzled over it. Why birds? Why no clothing? Why here one theory emerged morning. Birds, especially doves, were symbols of peace of departure, and widows in Rome were often isolated, avoided, whispered about. Perhaps this latrine was her retreat, the one place where she could cry in peace. Not in the bath, where others stared, not in the atrium where servants whispered, but here, where the walls didn't judge, and the birds sang only in paint. It was said some widows wore no color for years. Perhaps this one too carried her grief like a garment, and even here, in the most human act, she mourned. In a temple ruin outside Rome, a latrine was discovered behind the sanctuary. Unusual. Temples rarely had attached waste rooms, yet this one did. Inside, archaeologists found a sandal, delicate, gold-stamped, unmatched, and on the wall, a faint inscription. Not Latin, but Greek. She heard the voice. That was all. Some believed the latrine belonged to a priestess, a woman tasked with maintaining purity, both physical and spiritual. But one day she vanished. The record stopped, the sandal stayed, and the temple was closed the following year. No explanation. But those who study cult rituals say water and waste were often seen as channels to the gods, a place where messages slipped between worlds. Perhaps she heard something, and never returned. Or perhaps she left a piece of herself behind, written not in ink but silence. Latrines weren't just practical, they were spiritual. You're 10 years old, your mother leads you into the public latrine near the forum. She's not there to use it, she's there to teach you. She holds your hand firmly, even though you've been here before. The stone is cold under your feet, the air damp, laced with vinegar and faint herbs. She speaks softly. Clean hands mean clean thoughts, she says, guiding you to the rinsing bowl. Then, with a cloth, she shows you how to wipe the bench before sitting, how to hold the tersorium without letting the sponge touch your tunic, how to set it back into the jar, always soaked, always angled down. It's not just hygiene, it's honor. In many Roman households, cleanliness wasn't a private matter, it was moral. To be unclean was to be untrustworthy. To neglect the body meant you might neglect duty. Seneca once wrote, "If a man cannot keep his seat clean, how shall he govern a household?" And so, mothers taught daughters. Fathers guided sons. In the simplest acts, rinsing, wiping, sharing virtues were passed. In some latrines, tablets were posted with short, moral phrases, "Respect others, leave it as you found it." Shame dwells in filth. Schoolboys memorized rules, not just of language and law, but of conduct in common spaces. Even the gods were invoked. Minerva for wisdom, Fortuna for luck, Cloacina, the goddess of the sewers, for purity, because the Romans believed what went in must come out, and if your body released waste, your soul must release pride. You look up at your mother. She doesn't smile. She nods. And now you understand. This wasn't just about keeping clean. It was about becoming Roman. You sit. To your left, a merchant sorting coins. To your right, a man in armor, sweating through his tunic. Across from you, a boy no older than 12 staring at the floor. And no one speaks. This is a Roman public latrine. Unsegregated, unpartitioned, all classes, all ages. In a city where status ruled everything, clothing, speech, marriage, this place was different. Here senators and slaves sometimes sat side by side. Not as equals, but as bodies, needing the same thing. Even emperors used them. Vespasian, it said, once walked into a latrine unannounced just to remind people he was still a man. Compared to other ancient cultures, this was radical. In Egypt, elite tombs had private latrines. In Greece, outhouses were built far from homes hidden. But in Rome, waste was a civic matter. The Cloaca Maxima ran under the city like a dark river of democracy. And latrines lined the streets, bathhouses, and forums, not hidden, but integrated. Archaeological sites in Ostia and Pompeii show rows of stone seats, no walls between them. Shared water channels, shared space. Not out of intimacy, but necessity. You glance around, no one looks up. Everyone focused, everyone vulnerable. In this rare moment, social lines blur. Your title doesn't matter, your villa doesn't matter. Your wealth can't shield you from what your body demands. And for just a few minutes, you exist not as a citizen or slave, but as a human. You rise, wash, leave, and the seat is empty again, waiting for the next soul, whoever they are. You sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers. The stone is cold, the air damp. It feels equal, but you know it isn't, because the man beside you wears wool dyed with Tyrian purple, and yours is coarse-patched linen. You both squat the same way, use the same drain, but his servant waits just outside the door. Yours is the one cleaning the latrine at dawn. Roman public latrines were built on a promise of shared space, but not shared power. Even among the tiles and flowing water status whispered. Some seats had better views, some corners were cleaner, and some people simply refused to enter, sending slaves instead to hold space to pre-wipe the stone, to flush shame down the drain before it touched their skin. The illusion of equality was maintained for function. But the layers never vanished. Even graffiti revealed the truth. For the poor, the smell is free. Sit low, stay low. Those who couldn't pay a bribe to reserve cleaner hours came later. Those who lacked fine tunics entered last. Sometimes you see a patrician enter. He nods to no one, sits, leaves, forgets, but the vendor next to you lingers, washing his hands longer, because he knows he's watched. In Rome, the latrine may have stripped away the palace walls, but not the invisible ones. You glance around your modern bathroom, bright, tiled, silent. Then you remember where you've been in marble halls filled with strangers' vinegar scents and stone benches without partitions. Strange, isn't it? Rome 2,000 years ago had running water, flushing channels, and public hygiene protocols. Today, many cities still struggle to match that. In ancient Rome, even the poor could access running water, if only briefly. Today, billions lack safe sanitation. Rome built latrines near marketplaces, theaters, temples, because defecation wasn't shameful. It was life. Now we hide it, behind doors, behind euphemisms. We build walls, soundproofing separate stalls, and yet shame persists. Seneca wrote, "Cleanliness is next to dignity." Today we say, "Wash your hands." But have we advanced? Or simply disguised? Roman sewer workers were respected, essential. Today, sanitation workers are often invisible, and their tools. We trade sponges soaked in vinegar for toilet paper that kills forests. We flush with drinkable water. Rome reused water from baths for toilets. We let clean water swirl away in gallons. You sit, you think. They weren't perfect, but maybe they knew something we forgot, that sanitation isn't just utility, it's community. You hear laughter, then the rustle of coin. Someone's negotiating fish prices while seated. Someone else debates politics 2 seats down. The Roman latrine was more than a place to relieve yourself. It was a forum, a stage, a pause in the day where masks slipped. Men discussed love affairs here. Old women whispered secrets. Scribes copied graffiti into notebooks. Priests overheard confessions without intent. In Pompeii, graffiti reveals fragments of flirtation. "I saw you, beautiful baker, and I hope to sit beside you again." In Ostia, price updates for olive oil. In Rome, political insults scrawled in rhyme. And then, a silence. Because sometimes people just sat together, breathing, thinking. There were no phones, no headphones, no barriers. And so in the most unexpected place community formed. You weren't alone, not truly, even if no one looked at you, even if no one spoke. The sound of shared water, the rhythm of relief, the echo of humanity, it bound them, as it binds us now in quieter, more isolated ways. You flush, and the sound is immediate, swallowed, hidden, gone. You wash your hands, reach for a towel, then pause, because somewhere in your mind the stone bench lingers, the rough sponge, the shared silence. Rome is gone, but its lessons echo. Hygiene is health, but also identity. Infrastructure, yes, but also inclusion. The Romans knew that a functioning latrine was a statement: we care for the collective, not just the powerful, not just the clean. And when latrines broke down, disease spread, community fractured. Today we flush and forget. But the luxury of forgetting is not available to all. Ask a mother in a slum. Ask a refugee in a camp. Ask a janitor cleaning a clogged stall. The Roman latrine reminds us sanitation is dignity. Access is equality. And privacy is not always freedom. You stare into the mirror, clean, alone. But remember, Once long ago, even emperors sat without walls. And that truth, that intimacy, that fragility still matters. Even now, you pick it up gently, a sponge on a stick. Simple, innocent. But history has wrapped it in myth. The Tersorium, Rome's infamous toilet tool. You've heard the stories. Romans were hygienic geniuses. They used vinegar-soaked sponges, communal, but safe. But how clean was it? Really, archaeological findings complicate the romance. No sterile process, no single-use policy, no disinfectant as we know it. In places like Herculaneum, researchers found sponge remains buried in sediment, but not replaced regularly, not even rinsed often. And the vinegar, yes sometimes, but not always. In poorer districts, people dipped their sponge into shared water troughs. Used, reused, stirred, again and again. Graffiti even joked about it, better to hold it in than trust the bowl. Doctors like Galen spoke of anal inflammation and fevers of the lower organs likely from shared sanitation tools. Even Pliny the Elder warned against moist objects left too long. Still, Romans believed in cleanliness. They tried, but trying doesn't mean succeeding. What we remember today is filtered through marble villas and elite bathhouses, not the alleys, not the underfunded latrines. So no, the Tersorium wasn't a marvel of sanitation. It was a compromise between belief and bacteria, between comfort and practicality. And you might set it down now, a little more gently. You light a candle, not for mood, for safety, because in the dark corner of the latrine, you've heard whispers, not voices, but the kind of fear passed through generations. Romans didn't just fear filth, they personified it. Meet Stercudius, the god of manure. Not satire, not metaphor. He was worshipped. Romans offered to him during field fertilization, but also quietly in the corners of latrines, burnt herbs, murmured prayers, charms buried beneath the stone. May my waste leave me clean. May no spirits cling. This wasn't about sewage. It was about shame. Bodily functions reminded people of mortality, of weakness. So they wrapped those fears in ritual. Graffiti in Pompeii reads, Stercudius, protect my stomach. Elsewhere, they carved little faces on walls, wards, watching. Even in elite homes, amulets shaped like eyes or hands were hung near drains. You think superstition is ancient, but modern bathrooms have lucky charms too. Scented candles, crystals, even the habit of flushing twice, just in case. We still fear the unclean, the unseen. And maybe, just maybe, Stercudius still smiles from a forgotten corner. You step forward in time. The stone becomes dirt. The marble fades. You're no longer in a Roman latrine. You're in medieval Europe. And something's missing. No running water, no hypocaust, no organized sewer system. What happened? After Rome's fall, infrastructure collapsed. Not just roads and aqueducts, but knowledge. In cities like Paris and London, people dumped chamber pots into streets. Gardilou, they'd shout as waste rained down from upper windows. The Cloaca Maxima was still there, but unused, forgotten. Why? Because waste management requires collective effort. And after Rome, fractured society turned inward. Individual castles, individual lords, individual toilets if any. Public latrines vanished. Hygiene became private, or non-existent. Even monks who once copied Roman texts began to view the body as impure. Cleanliness was seen as vanity, bathing, a temptation. Disease followed, typhoid, cholera, and later, the Black Death. The world forgot what Rome once built. And as you crouch over a wooden hole in the drafty outhouse of a 12th century village, you wonder, how did they lose so much? Now you stand in a bright tiled bathroom. Mirror, sink, toilet with a dual flush. You're modern, you're clean. Or are you Romans washed with oil? We use soap. They shared sponges. We flush paper. They feared curses. We feared germs. But some fears stay the same. Today we obsess over hygiene, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, 5-second rules. In ancient Rome, cleanliness was moral, a sign of virtue. Dirt meant shame. Modern marketing still echoes that feel fresh, stay pure, be clean. But we now have science. We know microbes. We understand diseases. Or do we? Because misinformation still spreads about vaccines, hand-washing public toilets. We flush, but not always what we should. In many cities, sewage still leaks into rivers. Toilet access is still unequal. So maybe Rome didn't have it all figured out, but neither do we. The latrine has changed, but the human behind the door still worries about being seen, about what's left behind, and maybe that's the constant, from Rome to now. You sit back now, not on cold stone but maybe your own bed, the blankets pulled up, the air still. And as your mind drifts, you carry with you a strange truth the Romans thought deeply about toilets, not just to relieve themselves, but to organize, to share, to ritualize, to belong. Latrines weren't hidden. They were public, communal, a place of routine and rhythm. You didn't just go to the toilet, you followed rules, unspoken codes. Graffiti wasn't vandalism, it was commentary. Tersoria weren't just tools, they were symbols. Water wasn't just clean, it was divine. Everything had meaning, even the things we flush. And now you're here. Modern plumbing, private stalls, locks, soap, warm towels. You flush and never think twice. But it wasn't always this way. In ancient Rome, sanitation was infrastructure, and belief, and hierarchy. They had the cloaca maxima. We have sewage plants. They offered to Stercutius. We trust Laysol. But deep down, we're not so different. We still fear contamination. We still follow rituals, wash hands, spray air freshener, check behind us. It's easy to think we're more advanced. But sometimes, we're just modern versions of ancient habits. Different tools, same thoughts. The Romans didn't just manage waste. They managed meaning. And so do we. So here's a question, friend. Now that you know all this, the sponge, the graffiti, the ghost beneath the bench, does it change the way you look at your bathroom, at your routine, at your body? Because the Romans weren't gross. They were just aware and afraid and proud, like us. We carry so much about cleanliness, not just soap, but shame, pride, rules we never question. So the next time you flush, will you think of Rome or maybe of something else, something bigger? Let me know what you think. So tell me, does knowing all this change how you see your daily routine? Let me know below. Now close your eyes. You're not in ancient Rome anymore. No cold stone, no whispers in the drain, no need to look over your shoulder. You're here, safe, clean, alive. You've survived this journey through latrines and laughter, through marble halls and muddy alleys, through ghosts and gods. And now you can sleep. Let the sounds around you fade. Let the past dissolve. No more tersorium, no more worry, just the hush of the present. And if you feel the urge to smile, that's okay. History is strange, and so are we. But you made it. Sleep well.